best Sunday jam session. So we just focus on every segment and how to make it work. But at the end of the day, it was like back to that original formula. We knew our brand of hospitality. I hired people that would see it as an honor to take care of the type of clientele that I wanted to hire. And we brought them, most people that I hired, I would say, I don't have an exact stat, but I'd say that 80% of the people that I hired had zero industry experience. I hired them from Blockbuster, Hertz Rent-A-Car, a local grocery store, a kid who I saw, hustling, helping someone take their rubbish out, 20 years old, and said, "Hey, where do you work?" "I'm working down at the paint store." "Have you ever thought about working in the restaurant industry?" I got a 6-month induction program. After that, here's how it all works. Come in once a month on Tuesday night. We show people how we do this. So that's how we built teams. And it was an awesome thing. You get one and then it just builds and builds.
This episode is brought to you by Restaurant Systems Pro. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, founder of Barmetrix, CEO and head coach at Finter Group, and owner of the Franklin House, Sean Finter. My man, Sean, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I'm absolutely feeling unstoppable since 1973.
Nice, man. I'm feeling unstoppable. Really, the direction I'm trying to take the show is just listening, paying attention to what my guests are saying, and my guests have steered me in this direction. We're here because people are talking about you. You first came on my radar. Actually, I've known about Barmetrix for some time. It's come up over the past 10 years at least 3 or 4 times organically in conversation. I connected with the Daves behind Hospitality DNA, who are also Barmetrix franchisees.
That's right.
Franchisee
Yep.
Operators. And through their network of talking to, we had Gary Crunkleton, I believe, who said great things about you. We had Drew and Kevin, who said great things about you down in Raleigh, North Carolina. We had Gary, Gary, I'm all over the place right now. McGarry, Jack McGarry from the Dead Rabbit, who said amazing things about you. And here we are. We made it happen. So,
wow. Well, I hope I can live up to all
the
that.
universe is trying to tell me something, man.
Yeah.
And I'm psyched to be here. I know it's going to be good. But before we dive into who you are and how you got to where you are today, let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I think a great life mantra that came in handy in the last few years was that a precursor to a breakthrough is often a break with. So I'm the kind of guy who always wants to do more, and I hit a point in my life where I couldn't do any more, and doing less, spending less time with certain people, less projects, less shiny objects was a key for me.
So when was this for you?
About 5 years ago.
Okay.
So that'll be the deep part of the story as we go through today.
So, I mean, can you paint a picture of all the things that you're doing and what you mean by you couldn't do anymore?
Yeah, I'm a typical entrepreneur that, always working on the next thing, often before I finish the 2 or 3 things I got in front of me. And
shiny syndrome or shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. I've also got 4 kids and a few different businesses, and I belong to a lot of groups, and I hit a point in my life where, just couldn't continue to load things on. And I think hopefully, we all get to a certain point of maturity where you realize that saying no is the right thing to do, and less projects and less ideas. And it certainly took its toll on me, and I'm in a better place now.
Everything you say yes to is something else you have to say no to.
Right.
And
or what a mentor of mine said, every time you say yes to something new, you're saying no to a commitment you've already made.
Right.
You're robbing time from that.
Only got 24 hours in a day, right? What happened when you said no, and what was the thing that came off your table?
Well, a lot. Sold a company that I had for 2 decades.
Barmetrix.
Yep. Shut down another business, another partnership. Totally overhauled my schedule. This is right before COVID, so I made an awful lot of changes. It was a good time for a crisis, I guess. But I made an awful lot of changes, and it's something I was really good at. Maybe the decade before, and looking every 3 years, like, am I in the life I want to be living? Have I got everything in place? What do I want new? What do I want to do more of? What should I do less of? What should I stop doing? I got out of that habit and just kept building weight and momentum, and it eventually, it became really heavy.
I mean, I think you know what? We'll bookmark this we'll bookmark this because we're definitely going to be coming back to
Okay.
it as we're telling your story. But I'm interested in going deeper, and I think we can learn a lot from that idea of slowing down to speed up.
Right.
But where does it make sense to start sharing your story? Take us to the beginning.
Well, I grew up in Canada, so I spent the first 19 years of my life there. I'm very proud of being Canadian, and I love going back to visit my family. The winters were just definitely not for me. I'm not a winter guy.
I hear that.
But that's where my story started, and it's where the story started in the industry. I was 12 years old, working in restaurants. Believe it or not, wasn't my first job. It was like my fifth job at 12 because newspaper route, shoveling snow, cutting grass, any sort of work and hustle I could get. I was doing it, even working at a gas station, which I can't believe they let 11-year-old kids work at gas stations back then.
Times have changed.
But, getting into the restaurant business, I can say without a doubt, not only changed the direction of my life, but afforded me a life that I could never even have dreamt of. It's just, and in hindsight, looking back to getting in and starting out at a truck stop in small town Canada, a town of 2,000 people. To this day, it's probably one of the most remarkable places I've ever worked in my life.
Why was it so remarkable?
Like a lot of businesses, one person and built a core around him and a team. I'll give you an example. When I started there, I got a job washing dishes for him, for a gentleman named Mr. Panu. He'd been in Canada probably 30 years at this time. Athens, Greek, came over with his wife when they were young with very little money and kind of built this life for themselves. I get the job there washing dishes, and two things happen on my first day. Firstly, he comes in, puts an apron on, and he says, "Well, I'm with you for the first half of the day today." And I said, "Really? I'm just washing dishes." And he goes, "This is the most important position in my restaurant." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, let me tell you. If we don't have dishes in the kitchen, we can't serve customers, and they don't come back. If dirty dishes go out, specks on the cutlery and plates, people don't come back." He said, "This is the Intel Center. If we're blowing it in the kitchen, you're going to see food coming back. Your half-eaten burgers and soggy fries and all that." And so he said, "This is like the hub of the business. If this doesn't work, nothing works." Now, I will say that when I got on the line in the kitchen, he stood beside me and said, "This is the most important position in the restaurant." But he meant it. Like, they're all important.
They're all important. Every link in the chain
Yeah,
matters.
it's not like a GM is 60% of the job and everything else trickles down. Like, if you don't get them all right, then it doesn't work.
The chain doesn't work if there's a break in it.
Right.
But
he spent those hours with me and time every day, taught me the difference between running a load at 110% versus 90%, right? 110, it doesn't come clean. 90, he told me about the electric bills and how it runs, and that means every 10 loads we've missed out on a load, So what things cost, the interaction between the kitchen, front of house, and so on and so forth. So it was an overwhelming few hours. There was a lot to learn for a dishwashing job, and I had my break, and then he said to me, "You finished your break?" Probably 10 minutes, and he said, "Come with me." And he took me to the middle of the floor of the restaurant, a truck stop. He didn't like it being called a truck stop, by the way. He said it was a family restaurant. But I think by definition, if you have 20 tractor trailers parked in front of your business, it is a truck stop. So he walks him in the middle of the floor in the restaurant, and he says, "Look around." He says, "What do you see?" And a bunch of adults, right? Guys with caps on, and it's busy, and a couple of kids over here, and a lot of truckers. And he goes, "Well, what else do you see?" And I said, "I don't know, just a lot of adults eating food." And he goes, "Okay." He walked over to a table, a trucker that he knew, and said, "Bob, can I grab your keys?" And he takes me out to the parking lot, and the transport truck, their brand new truck. And he gave me the keys. He said, "Go open the door and then let me in." So I went in the driver's seat. And I remember climbing up that ladder. I'd never been in one before. And as soon as I sat down, I'll never forget, because like air compression, it goes down. And I looked at the dashboard. It was much more like an airplane cockpit than the car that my parents drove, right? This is a different machine.
Right.
And he's now knocking on the window, and I let him in the other side. And he sits down and he says, "Shut the door." And we're both staring out the front of this truck. I thought I was going to drive it. And he said, "What do you see now?" And I look around the truck, and I said, "Wow, it's cleaner than I thought it was." He goes, "Yeah, these guys live in these trucks. They really appreciate cleanliness." So what else do you see? I look, there's a bed behind me. And he said, yeah, they sleep in here. That's why they're lonely. They're burly, but they really crave attention and connection. What else do you see? There's a picture on the dashboard of Bob from inside, and a woman and 2 kids. I assume his wife and kids. And he goes, yeah, most of these guys have families. So as tough and funny as they seem, they're missing,
Right.
So we spent about 5 or 10 minutes in that truck, and I walked back inside. We stood on the floor, and he says, now look around. What do you see? And I noticed, I said, these 4 guys here are truckers. These 2 guys here are truckers. Even the hats, the farmer hats were John Deere. The trucker hats were International. And he says, right, these are farmers. They're local.
Yeah.
Right? Totally different animal than these guys over here. He said, if we treat farmers like truckers and truckers like farmers, they'll stop coming here. He said, these people are local families that come in here. And suddenly, I had this filter as a 12-year-old kid, and I'm looking at the floor of a restaurant differently. And he goes, the worst thing that we can do is treat everyone the same way. Right? The golden rule, it'll bankrupt us.
Man.
And certainly no one wants to be treated like a 12-year-old kid wants to be treated.
And this was when you were washing dishes. This was how long were you at this location working?
I worked there for 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
And this was towards the beginning of your experience.
This was my first day.
First day.
Right.
Wow.
So for everyone listening, think about, I don't care if you're 12 or 42 or 72 starting in a restaurant, think about your first day, right? Can you put that lens on someone? Can you change your perspective? And that was the first day, and it only went on from there.
Right. But just even that, I mean, there's so many lessons in that to really be observant, to recognize everybody for who they are, to not just to make assumptions about people, but also just the power of segmenting and treating and speaking to each individual like the way they want to be treated, and carrying that message throughout your marketing and paying attention to who people are so you know how to talk to them and appeal to them. Yeah. So powerful.
And looking at the formula in that too, who's saying it and how are they saying it, right? This is the business owner. Now, granted, he only owns a truck stop, but he still owns a business and he's busy. He could have had the manager do this with me.
Right. But
the root to the fruit, right? He wanted me to understand from his perspective where he was at. And as I went on in business, and you look, even companies the size of GE, Jack Welch got Cottonville to bring all of his leaders in within the first 12 months of working there to go root to the fruit with Jack directly, right? This is what I believe. This is what I'm fighting for. This is what I will not tolerate. This is what we're after right now, right? They heard it and they bought in from the head guy. And if GE can do it, a restaurant can do it.
So you did this from 12 to 16.
16, yeah.
16.
Yeah.
What was next for you?
So my my dream at that time in my life was tips, right? So I had the opportunity to go from washing dishes to work in the back line in the kitchen to cooking there. I did get a short stint bussing out front. I'm incredibly clumsy. I'm like the worst busser or waiter or anything else. But of course I couldn't buy into that, But it was there was a restaurant across the road that was willing to take me on as a waiter. I was known as a very hardworking kid. I always asked for a ton of responsibility and delivered. And if I made a mistake, I tried to make up for it. So I got an opportunity as a waiter across the road, which was a gig that took me the next 18 months to 2 years before I landed in the big time, or at least I thought at the time, in Toronto at Hard Rock Cafe when I was like almost 19.
Damn.
Yeah.
So any key evolution for you, any lessons during this time, or did that not happen until the Hard Rock?
Well,
I mean, the Hard Rock's probably a different beast in terms of, it's corporate, whereas these other spots seem very mom and pop. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, they were definitely mom and pop. I think there was 2 things that happened in that time. One, organically, it was delivered by the universe, in that, I was, like a lot of young Canadian kids, very hopeful that I might make $1 at some stage playing hockey. And, that just wasn't the cards for me. I worked hard at that as well. But when you hit 12, 13 and you see guys pulling away, they're like 20, 30, 40% better than you. So, I tried, and I just came to the realization this wasn't going to be it. Around the same time was the discussion started about holding me back in school. And that to me was like a prison sentence. I just couldn't even fathom being made to stay an extra year in school. So, back to that truck stop, I was, the day that I found out that they wanted to hold me back a year, I was back, and this is when I'm working on the line in the kitchen and I'm prepping for the shift.
13, 14 ballpark.
Yeah, about 14 years old. And I guess I was teary on my own, thinking that I was by myself. And Mr. Panu came up from behind, and in his soft and gentle way, he barked out, "Why are you crying?" And I said, being a tough young guy, "Oh, I'm not crying."
Yeah.
I wish I was cutting onions, but I wasn't. And he said, "No, tell me why you're crying." And I said, "I don't want to talk about it." And I was sent to the stoop. We had this stoop out back where his dogs were, and so I was sent there. And he came out and he said to me, "What happened?" And I said, I had said the S word out loud for the first time. I said, I'm stupid. That's why I'm crying. I'm going to be cutting vegetables for the rest of my life, or digging ditches, or whatever it might be. And he said, "Why are you saying that?" And I said, "What's what they're telling me at school? Like, if I can't get through school, then I've got to have one of these jobs that I don't want, and everything else." And he kind of grabbed me by the shoulders, and he said, "It's all bullshit, Sean." He said,
"That's the S word I thought you were going to say."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The word stupid cut a lot more than. And he said they're lying to you. He said they only know one way to do things, and I'll never forget.
Wow.
He said never take advice from a person who drives a rusty Pinto. Right? He said unless you want to drive a rusty Pinto.
Yeah.
He goes, they have no idea what he said. He said he had a second grade education, and he said, but here's what you got to do. You got to learn how to learn. Right? He said the only thing you've proven so far is that you can't learn their way. But he said, you will not allow them to define you.
Do you have learning disabilities?
I have a really rare form of dyslexia.
Really?
And it was a challenge for a very long time. I was tested when I was 20 years old, when I was living in London, England. And I either had a third grade reading ability and a second grade comprehension, or the other way around, depending on dyslexia. But I learned to read when I was 20, 21 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm dyslexic too. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that are drawn to this industry who are dyslexic or ADHD or ADD. I would love to get somebody on the show who's a specialist on the subject to
Yeah.
talk about how to learn differently, and like how if you're not fitting into the standard form that society wants you to fit into, like the school system, for example. You know? Like there's other ways. And the other thing, people who I found that it's a pattern. Successful people in this industry, a lot of time, not all the time, but often, more often than other industries, have some type of learning disability, and it's often dyslexia.
Right.
There's definitely a pattern. Have you noticed that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's a ton of people in the industry, and as an entrepreneur, there's a ton of very famous entrepreneurs that have that. And I think I believe we always hit these crossroads where something or someone either makes you better or bitter, right? And I honestly believe today that my dyslexia is a big part of my business success.
Why?
Early on, I learned to do a lot of things that young kids don't do, like negotiate with adults, begging, bribing my teachers to see me through. I learned to get up on stage, and whether that's being the class clown to distract from my disability. I worked young because I thought I had to. I was attracted to mentors and realized if I can't learn that way, I've got to learn this way. So I think that at that point in my life, that was a catalyst for me, and certainly an incentive to get my act together. And I think later in my career, my brain just processes things differently. It's not very good for day-to-day tasks, unfortunately, but I can look at complex problems and break them down and simplify them and draw them.
Big
that's
picture thinking.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I can do well. That I could be in a room with a Fortune 500 company and listen, and everyone has to absorb and then output, and mine is always it's jumbled, and then suddenly I have to make it make sense for myself to play back.
Yeah,
So
and it's something that I'm picking up just from the short time we've had together is there's a really short channel from your heart to your mouth. Right. You know what you're feeling, and you find the words easily. And I don't know if it's like the mind is very what's the word, plastic, and I think like it's plastic from a day-to-day standpoint where you can literally create new neural pathways in this moment, but it's also plastic in our minds are all the same, but they can all be so very different too.
Right.
Like the diversity of a mind and the strengths and weaknesses of a mind, like in just how we're all different, right?
Right.
And the written word has only really been popularized over the past couple hundred years. You know, where everybody's expected to be able to read. I don't think it's. But if you and if you're alive today, all you've known is a is everybody being able to read, but I don't think it's necessarily a human thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's one of those skills that is so important in the modern world, and I think we just assume everybody should be able to do it. But the social and emotional intelligence, I think there's almost like this level of plasticity where people with dyslexia might not be good with technical detail type things, but they're really good at social emotional skills.
Right.
I've found. Is that something that you
do
you support that? Or
I do. And I think that if you look at the yin and yang of reading, when you're reading, often if you're reading nonfiction, you're reading somebody's story, and so I wasn't able to do that, so I learned to become a storyteller. You know what I mean? I find a lot of dyslexic people are really good at articulating themselves and can keep an audience engaged. And because in the absence of being able to be buried in a book in class when you're supposed to be, reading and being quiet, you're dreaming.
Yeah.
and then you can't wait to get that story out of your head.
I like to joke. The first thing I learned how to do in school was read a clock.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it time for recess?
That's right.
Well, this is great. I'm having fun with the conversation. So you kind of learn more about yourself in your late teens, early 20s. You get tested. This was when you're in London. Are we skipping over anything?
Well, so I did that stint in Toronto. So Toronto
Hard
for
Rock.
me was only an hour south, but I mean it was the difference between Annapolis and New York City, right? A small town and the big city. And Hard Rock for me was a very important brick in the foundation for me. Working for an international bar company, there's some of the few people that have become billionaires with a B through the bar business. And the systems they had in place, they had enough systems to keep it consistent, but enough freedom inside the business model that people could be individuals. And I really loved it there. I did. I was there only a short time. Because I had an opportunity to go to London to work. When high school finished, I tell my kids that, I'm not a high school dropout. I was there when school finished. I didn't go anywhere. I just didn't get the diploma, right? I was missing 2 English credits and 2 math credits because 11th and 12th grade, you have to read the problems. And there was a huge attachment of shame with that for me. It just wasn't something that I was emotionally mature enough to really wrap my head around and couldn't talk about. And my friends who had gone off to London were working for Sam Smith pubs there, bartending, and told me about it on the phone. This is obviously before pre-internet, and it just sounded like this amazing opportunity. And in hindsight, I more ran away from something in Canada, ran away from who I felt I was, rather than kind of ran to this opportunity. I was able to reconcile that in later years, but it's I think it's an important distinction for me to understand, how I grew up and what I dealt with, so that I could be a better dad and understand that, even if it's not your fault, it can still be this shackle of shame.
Yeah. So with the Hard Rock, you mentioned something real quick, and I'm pretty sure you're still talking. At this point, Toronto was all Hard Rock, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You said they found this right balance between systems and letting their people be themselves. And I think that there is a sweet spot. Right. And I think probably one of the reasons why the Hard Rock is so successful is in a world where everything was so focused on the bottom line during the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, where we kind of lost sight of what's important, the culture, they were able to hang on to it. What did you learn about how they found that sweet spot, that letting people be themselves while being plugged into these systems and processes?
Yeah, I've luckily had experience working there firsthand, and then had enough time to reflect on what it was and what I believe and why it worked. So there's an incredible formula inside of what they did. First off, they really did a great job of bottling their brand of hospitality, right? So one of the first cassettes that I heard was from one of their founders, Isaac Taggart, who talked, and I might have the percentages off by a little bit, but basically what he said was, we're going to show you how to do this our way, but we want you to be you on the way through, right? So we have a formula, but the formula includes you, right? We're not trying to make you into a drone. And he said, and if you deliver it, every guest, every shift, he said, here's what's going to happen. 20% of people are going to absolutely love it and become raving fans. 60% of people will appreciate it and probably come back again. and 20% are going to absolutely hate it. And he says, I love those fucking numbers. Right?
Yeah.
So he helped us understand that what we're doing isn't for everybody, and that's okay. Right? Most restaurants, most bars try to pander to everybody, and it's just then you don't make anybody happy.
Right.
Right? It's all just lukewarm. So that was part of the formula. I got to understand how they hired, right? So they had this brand of hospitality. They knew who was successful within it, and they understood how to interview for these particular constituencies that they were serving.
And I don't know if it's worth getting into what is that brand, because every restaurant's different, right? You want to hire for your uniqueness as a brand.
Yeah.
And experience, right?
Well, this could be of interest to people listening. If you have a restaurant, you've got your brand. Hard Rock, these guys, I don't think there was any accident in them becoming billionaires, right? But their brand is one of the most misunderstood brands in the restaurant business. So we'll start with the name, right? What does Hard Rock mean? We all think it means rock and roll. Well, that all came about. They started in London. The original name was the Truck Stop. So they started in London. They're in this old Rolls-Royce dealership right off the park. And they knew that the Brits loved burgers, fries, shakes, and all that. So they start serving that over there. They realized that Truck Stop didn't work for a name because in London or in the UK, they call them lorries, not trucks. Lorry Stop didn't sound very good. They thought it might sound like a brothel or something. So they said, well, we're not going to do that. So Isaac said, we're going to name it after the philosophy of my mentor, Sai Baba. Well, Sai Baba's theory is that we're born with a great big boulder on our shoulder, and we go through life chipping away at this boulder. And when we're ready to pass, we can reach up and grab that stone, that hard rock off our shoulder, cross our arms, and go into the next life. So that's where Hard Rock comes from.
Interesting.
But back to the Hard Rock Truck Stop in London. One of their policies was no reservations. They had people hold a table. They didn't come. London's so hard to get around in, so we'll get you in as soon as we can. And I think the first one, and this, I might have this wrong, but it was a big name like Clapton was one of the first guys to come in and say, can I get that table? I said, no, this person's waiting. And so he sent his guitar in, put it above his booth, so that when people were waiting, they'd think that's a Clapton booth and he can go over there. Well, next up, the Stones, the Beatles, everyone started sending in either pieces of clothing, an instrument, whatever else. And that's how all their stores got covered in this merchandise.
Oh man, that's a crazy story.
Yeah. But that just goes to show, like, they had a brand. They stayed true to this brand of like, keep chipping away. And that's what they thought the shift was like, right? It was a grind, but it's worth it. We're headed to the right place. And then what you do see in their branding on the wall, love all, serve all, right? They could not tolerate an employee who had any sort of bias against any sort of group, right? They could miss it in the interview, but they'll walk you out. If they find you rolling your eyes at somebody, or, you find out, well, I don't like taking care of older people. Well, you don't work here, right? Like if you don't have an open heart and you want to take care of these people, love all, serve all, then you don't work here. So they had a really cool philosophy, it's actually a real hippie philosophy, I think. I
love it. And I never knew this. It's eye-opening. Yeah. It really is. And you're giving us great detail. I really appreciate that. So is it safe to say that the brand that they were trying to do and the culture they were trying to build is like, hey, it's simple framing of like, take care of people, love everybody. But I'm sure there's more than that.
Yeah, there is. If you look at it for what it is, right? And every store was a little different depending on who they were serving. Where I was, for example, we were right down the road from Harley dealership and a biker bar, and like a 99%er, not a biker bar, a traditional 1%er bar. There was a large elderly community in the housing in this place. And we got a lot of single moms during the day would come in with their strollers and show the kids all the paraphernalia. We were right in the Sky Dome, too, in a sports center, so it was cool to look out the window. So my interview, in hindsight, I look back, and three of the questions I got asked kind of off the cuff were, the person walking me to the table said, oh, I've been looking after my kids today. And do you don't have kids? You're young? And I said, no, I'm an uncle. I love kids. And it got worked in the interview with elderly. Do you have interaction with that? And I said, my grandparents, my 4 grandparents were everything to me. Yeah. Single mom. My sister's a single mom. Right? Yeah. I know now if I had disparaged one of those groups, I just didn't get the job. Yeah. They had 25 openings for every job, right? So you don't need to take someone who doesn't.
So they're
wanna-
looking for the 51 percenters, and
Yeah.
that's who they're hiring for.
Yeah.
That I think Danny Meyer famously coined the term the 51 percenter. The people that lean towards social and emotional intelligence and care,
Right.
and that they have that caring hospitality gene in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Any other big lessons from the Hard Rock before we move on to London?
Something that I adopted from them with my restaurant group a little later in life was, if you want to attract epic people, you have to do epic shit, right? Like you really do. So what do they do that's epic there? Just a few examples. If you work with them, you get in, I think it's 12 months or 18 months, and you prove yourself, you can apply like the military to be another post around the world. That's pretty epic. Every store is pretty well funded as far as staff outings, and it wasn't, let's go out and get drunk. You can do that at home. It was let's do something really cool. And I only did like 3 or 4 in my time in Toronto. I remember all of them.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so, guest speakers they had come in weren't, sometimes we're talking about cocktails or whatever it might be. One of the speakers we had was, hey, if I was between 20 and 30 years old in Toronto, one of the more expensive housing cities in the world, how do you get on the board? Right? What would you do? What advice would he have for his 20-year-old self? Right? That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Great lessons there. So why did you leave the Hard Rock? What was the reason for going overseas? You said you were trying to get away from something?
It was getting cold.
Wow.
and I had to get out of there, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone was going off to college
Right.
and everything else. And it was just time, it was
Yeah.
time to go and do that. And I had this opportunity to go to London. And, I was based out of London for 6 years. So I left, told my family like, hey, I'm going. And, again, I'll never forget landing at Heathrow, terrified, right? I'd never been anywhere. Had a backpack, and took the tube. My friends were living not far from the Piccadilly Circus tube station, and I came up. I remember looking up. It looked like I was going to heaven. It was like 4 escalators, up to. I'm like, I've never seen anything like this.
Big bright light at the end.
Yeah, if you put them all together, that was the length of the town I grew up in, and the main street. And so I look at it, and then I come out, and I'm outside, right at Piccadilly Circus, and I mean, I was like speechless. The black cabs, the double-decker buses, the red buses, all on the wrong side of the road.
That's cool.
The ladies all dressed up. It was business day, right? Wednesday afternoon. The guys with the suits on, the lights. I was like, and then the historic buildings that I had seen on TV. I was like,
So is this like the early 90s?
This was 93.
93?
92.
92.
Yeah.
Just trying to get the visuals in my head of what it was like back then. That's beautiful. So did you have a job lined up when you got there?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had a job with a temp job with Sam Smith Pubs, which gives you accommodation and 3 meals a day sort of thing. It wasn't going to be for me long term. And I'd heard about a bar opening actually right at Piccadilly Circus on Haymarket Street called the Sports Cafe, which is still there today in some form, but it was massive back then when they opened it up. And it was a Canadian and an American, and they were looking for staff, and they particularly wanted people from, Hard Rock Planet. They wanted to kind of model that success that they had. So I was only at the Sam Smith Pubs for maybe 6 to 8 months.
Okay. How long were you in London before going to Australia?
6 years I was based there. Yeah.
So where was the majority of your growth as a professional during this time? Where do you think you evolved the most?
A little bit each place along the way, but London was like my college. I worked for 2 companies after Sam Smith. Working at the Sports Cafe, I worked for the consulting company that launched it rather than the business itself. And so I learned a ton. I stayed on with them afterwards. But I also worked through them with another hotel and restaurant group that was all over Europe. And that company also had a turnaround department, a shop. They would buy businesses or groups of businesses and go in and turn them around. So at the time I was young, I was really good with HR, building teams. I was always captain of my hockey team. Learned a lot at Hard Rock. Sports Cafe, we built a monster team, incredible team. And so I did that all over Europe. In the time that I was in London in 6 years, I traveled to 32 different countries.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Not all for work. I do a contract, and the contract might only be 12 weeks. And then I wouldn't pick up on my next contract for, say, 4 weeks, and I would go and visit 3 countries in 4 weeks or 5, 6 weeks.
That's a wild time.
Yeah.
So how do you, if you could summarize how you think you learned or you grew the most, was it being able to see the big picture, being able to go in and analyze a restaurant and kind of focus on where it needs improving?
Yeah. Well, I learned operations by putting myself beside world-class operators. Nothing was by accident. I took less money to go to certain companies to work for people, and was interviewed by HR, but said I wouldn't take the job unless I got to talk to the person I wanted to work with. And I said, even if I get 15 minutes a week and you give me some extra responsibility, like, this is why I'm coming here. In my experience, when you say that and do that and see it through, like, you get a lot of time from these folks, because it doesn't happen very often. Someone's willing to back themselves.
That's a huge lesson right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, I was given advice before I left Canada, like, be more willing to take on responsibility and gain the experience than get the money. The money will come. If you get some deep experience and you get the results, the money's going to follow. And it was so true. I went deep rather than wide.
Right.
And gave up, something today to get something.
Yeah. It's crazy how we have such a short scope when it comes to that. When we're young, we're like, oh, I can make I can make $19 an hour over this $18 an hour. Like, I'm going to go to this other place,
Right.
but like, that's so short-term thinking. Like, where are you trying to go and who are the people that can help you get there? Do anything possible. Take a step back to be shoulder to shoulder with the right people who will help you get to that ultimate goal. Like,
Right.
sometimes you have to take a step back to go forward, or take a step to the left, take a lateral step if it means getting underneath a higher ceiling.
Absolutely. And a lot of my friends send their kids over to talk and get some advice, or they're stuck. And, I'm not saying all kids, but a lot of younger people today say, well, I don't get paid enough to do that. Or, I don't get, and I'm like, if they're giving you an opportunity to do it, and I said, where are they at right now? Like, they're underperforming in this department. They want you to do something. Well, what if you went in and gained the experience and absolutely crushed it? Got a couple people to help you and figure this out and crush it. Like, wouldn't that be valuable to you if you had that piece of paper that said, I did this, I accomplished this, and then you did it 2 or 3 more times? That's how you advance. Otherwise, you get paid a wage and it's attached to inflation.
Yeah.
And you get stuck.
Great lessons. What were you looking for in these individuals? What was appealing to you when you were choosing these opportunities based off the people you'd be working with? What exactly was drawing you to these people? How are you deciding?
Well, the one thing, if you don't have an education, you got to have a plan, right? Like, and otherwise you're just drifting down a river. So, my plan was ownership. I didn't know how, but that's what I was fixed on. In hindsight, it was probably the wrong goal for me. I thought it was a natural progression, and I had no idea how many cool jobs there were in the industry that have nothing to do with the risk and the stress of ownership. And we'll talk, I guess, in a little bit about my stint as an owner, which I'm proud of, very proud of.
We're real close. We're only a couple of years away.
Yeah, but I will say that my DNA is it's not in me to be an owner of a bar or restaurant. I'm just not good in that regard. It doesn't sit well with me. I like to start things. I like to build things. I like to 10x things, and it's not that I get bored, but that's my skill set.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, if your job was to set up all the equipment for today and that's what got you high and everything else, doing this probably wouldn't be your thing. Right. So me being the jockey on the back of that stable business and growing at 10, 20% a year just didn't work for me. So what I always tell younger people today is, like, don't think that there's a natural ascension to ownership, because there's a lot of things around it and even above it. You can make a lot more money that don't involve, like, the stress and agony in that.
So, yeah, I think we'll probably get to that, like you said. But anything that's worth hovering over your story during your time in London, that's worth unpackaging now before we start talking about your evolution going forward?
Yeah. So London was where I wrote my business plan, right?
Okay.
To acquire bars and restaurants, and I hope to do that with as little external funding and as few partners as I could. So that's all I knew. Another mentor of mine said the only ship that doesn't sail is a partnership. Right. So he's like, they will for a while, but at some point, and he said, especially 2 men, he said, if you know one man, he's a pain in the ass and he changes his mind a lot, put 2 of them together and you've got problems. Right. So I wrote the plan in London. And for me, one thing that early mentors of mine really drilled into me was just, re-up your mentors every couple of years, and then they'll help you see the blind spots and fill in the gaps on that plan. So that's what I did. That's the experience I wanted to gain while I was in London. And like I said, if I made just enough money to eat and live and got this experience, I would have been fine. The fact is, I actually made really good money, and I contemplated not leaving because they offered me, a senior position, which more money than I could even wrap my head around. A full-time job with great benefits and bonuses and everything else. But again, I knew that's not where I wanted to be. So, I guess the big learning for me in London was, and it was one of the first big good decisions that I made for myself, was follow your heart, and I'd been to Australia only once before.
It's a beautiful country. I've only been there once, but I'd love to go back. I'm going to have to chew on your ear to find out who I should talk to over there.
I went there on a quick assignment to look at a business that they were looking at, modeling after some aspects of it. So it's a cool gig. You go take a few photos, eat meals, study the business, watch it, and go back. But I landed there, and again, that was my 30th country I'd been to. I went to a couple more before I moved there full time, and my mom was always saying, "Oh, when are you going to come home?" And I said, "Oh, Mom, I'll be home one day." And I got to Sydney, landed, went in downtown, the Opera House and the harbor, Darling Harbor, went out to Bondi Beach, and I called my mom from a phone box. That's how old I am. and I said to her, "I'm never coming home." I just said, and she said, "What is it about that place?" And I said, "I can't even describe it.
It's a special place.
It's been in my heart since I lived there for 10 years. And
Which city were you in again? Sorry.
Sydney.
Sydney.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was down in Melbourne.
Okay.
I haven't been to Sydney yet, but I'd love to go. One thing I love about your story is this idea of mentors. And I knew even when starting this podcast that mentors were a big deal. It's even on the logo, a melting pot of mentors right there. And that's really what the vision of Restaurant Unstoppable is how do I get all these people who are mentors to others and put them in one spot and just get them to share knowledge and dump it out and pay it forward to the next generation of professionals. But there's nothing that's as amazing as finding that person that you admire and working with them for a few years. What is the sweet spot? You said, is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? How much, well, you said you never want to be with one mentor for too long.
Well, yeah, maybe. I certainly have lifelong mentors, but not in a formal way anymore. People I can call on and really help me out at a certain point in my life. For me, mentorship is this is how I define it and how it works for me. A mentor to me is somebody who has been to the place that I want to go and is on their way back and is willing to invest in somebody who's worthy. And I don't say that to be arrogant that I'm worthy of anything, but there's a lot of people that want something, but they're not going to take the advice. They're not going to do the work. And anyone who's had a lot of success isn't going to hang around that for very long.
Right.
So my mentorships are typically either a monthly arrangement or quarterly arrangement. I love to travel, so if they're in another city or another country, I'd certainly get on a plane to go there when it was convenient for them to have me visit. Otherwise, I might do it on Zoom.
Right. But I know you're too smart to go say, "Hey, I want to come work with you. When can you make time for me?" What is your approach when you reach out to these people? What are you looking to offer in exchange for their time and effort into you?
Well, I've never had a paid arrangement. I certainly had a lot of professionals that I've hired to help me, and I've had a lot of coaches that I pay money to, good money. But with mentorship, I usually start out. A lot of the people that I've had would be impossible to get to. There's no way to physically get to them. They all have gatekeepers.
Right.
And, not all. I've had some local people that have been amazing for me. But I would write and say, "Listen, very briefly, this is who I am. I've had mentors before. It's what's enabled my life." And I also let them know that it's not a one-way street, that I'm also giving back to people, and I'm a mentor to several people every year. And then I say very clearly, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to go to. This is why I think you can help me get there. And then I can give you this. It's like a one page. It says this is how it typically works for me, but I'm open to any format that would work for you. Yeah. And so what I try to do is to make it clear, make it easy. And then, maybe monthly is the best, but I say I'd be willing to do quarterly if that was better for you too.
And you said, "This is what I'm willing to give you." What are you willing to give?
Well, in the give, or what I'm willing to do is the work, and say to them that, I know there's a frustration that mentors have that you're, and it's not that mentors are telling you to do anything. Most often they're asking you questions, they're asking you, why the hell would you do that? Or
Yeah.
how does that make any sense? Or how long are you going to tolerate that person in your life? Those sorts of questions. But, for me, in my mentors and my boards, two very different things. But what I always try to do is all I can for them. And what I mean by that is to do what I say I'm going to do in the group. Always give feedback. If I'm not going to do it, I'll let them know and say, hey, this is why this isn't congruent with my values, or this isn't where I'm headed. But then, I'm very fortunate to be in this industry because of, not to put down a plumbing company, but if you own a plumbing company, you don't live near the plumber.
Right.
Not a lot he can do for you.
Right.
But I can open up doors in most cities around the world for my mentors, for my board. And when I can get them together or take them out, I can do some really cool shit with them, and just to say thank you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was looking for. Is I think a lot of people, when they think of mentors, they think of a one-way street. And I think you've got to approach mentors thinking about what value do I have that I can offer this person in exchange for their value.
Right.
How do I not just become a liability but an asset to this person?
Yeah.
And I think that once you figure out what value you can bring to somebody else, maybe you're great with marketing. Maybe you're a young person that's great with marketing, and you figured out the social media algorithms, and there's this older person, hey, like, I'll follow you around and I'll help you with social media for a quarter in exchange. I would love to get some mentorship, something like that.
Right.
Like, create a win-win situation. Don't just look to get, look to give.
Yeah. You're not going to be able to give, depends on the caliber of the person, but often the money you'd be able to give wouldn't be significant,
right,
nor would they take it. But their time is most precious. So with a lot of my mentors, after I get to know them, I'll get a email once in a while, or a call from their assistant and say, hey, Sarah that you're working with, or David that you're working with, they've got someone who needs some help right now. So now I'm helping the people that they, so I'm saving them time because I know who I am and know that I can offer them value.
Right.
And it gets them out of a call that their best mate from university wants them to talk to their kid.
The other thing I love about your story up to this point too is that at some point you knew you wanted to go open restaurants. That's what you wanted to do. And you went and you were working for somebody, and it was towards the end of your time in London where your job was going in and flipping restaurants. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
That is such a huge skill to have. I think it's one thing to work in a restaurant. It's a whole nother set of skills and a whole nother career opening restaurants.
Right.
Figuring out the market, creating a brand that fits in that market, finding good deals, knowing the real estate, finding turnkey operations, things like this. When did that become your objective?
To open a restaurant?
To open restaurants. Was it before working for this company that went and turned restaurants and hotels?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't have this like burning desire to open a bar or restaurant. I just thought it was the next thing to do. And I thought it was the highest return on my time, right? Keep moving up the ladder.
Right.
And the reason I say that, like a lot of people that I coach today had this burning passion to share their love of food, of cocktails, of wine, of cigars, whatever it is, with the world. I didn't have that. I couldn't cook.
What did you have?
Well, the funny thing is, I knew how to do restaurants, so I had a skill set, but my passion was very different than most restaurateurs. Because of my experience with school, because of a few other experiences I had along the way, I really felt like a misfit, and I felt that, and that feeling didn't go away even when I was making good money. I felt like I couldn't tell my whole story. I was horrified. Like people would say, where did you go to university? And I go, oh, I didn't go to university, and hope the conversation stopped there.
Right.
So I knew I could make money in restaurants. And my idea was I was going to get them up and running. I was going to buy them out of bankruptcy, get them up and running like I'd learned to do in London, and then find the right buyer and exit and go. My passion was, and what I was able to do was to create a stage for fellow misfits like myself. And again, I'm not disparaging anyone I work with. I loved everyone I work with, and people so much smarter and more talented than me. But if you look at the team that I assembled in Sydney, part of our interview process, like at Hard Rock, and a little bit of our marketing when we're looking for people, only a little bit, was mostly hand-to-hand combat and finding the right people. But we would say, hey, have you ever felt like you've been told who you are? You ever been pushed down before? You ever been told that you're a misfit, right? This is a company. We're taking people in. Everyone starts on the ground floor. My specialty in business at that time was induction. So I knew how to bottle hospitality, and then I knew how to teach it to the right people. And I said, if you come in with us, if you spend 3 years in this company, it will matter. You will be a different person. You'll be looked at differently. We are going to be the best in the business. And that's what we did. And I mean, we had people from all countries, of all stripes, and the one thing we all had in common, and I don't like to say it like a chip on our shoulder because that implies like some aggression, but it was like, yeah, if you've been told enough times, like, hey, you're never going to be anybody. We had a stage, and I'd say to people, if you're at the right time and right place in your life, this is a stage where you can earn your shot.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to this industry is because it was the first place. I mean, aside from the fact that I grew up in it and I just love restaurant people, but it's the only place I felt like I could be who I am,
right?
Which is usually not good for corporate settings.
Right.
As I get older, I think there's a better line to be, drawn and finding that place of professionalism,
Yeah.
especially when you start taking responsibility for younger people. You want to be, you don't want to act like you're still 20 years old when you're well into your 30s and 40s.
Right. Right.
But there's definitely that spot in my heart where I just love restaurant people because they are who they are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that really resonates with me. I love this. So ultimately, so you're traveling for work. You find yourself in Australia, Sydney. You say, "This is home. I'm moving here." And the plan was to move there and go open restaurants.
Yeah, the plan was to go there, get a feel for the city. So I hadn't been out of bartending that long, so I wanted to bartend at ideally kind of 2-3 different places to really understand the suburbs, the areas, to get a feel for the talent that was out there and make money. Right,
Yeah.
I brought a bit over, but I'm going to need money to.
Yeah, this is a good spot to take a break to thank our sponsors, and when we come back, we'll really unpackage your strategy and how you. This is good advice too. I think when you go anywhere, you can't just go there and expect to open up restaurants. You need to kind of acclimate to the culture and build your network and study the city. So Great segue. We'll be right back.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
All right, we're back in the timeline. You were just about to. Actually, you're in Sydney, and instead of just going there and looking to buy space and open a restaurant, your strategy is, I'm going to go bartend in a few different places, build my network, get a feel for the culture. How did you know to do this?
The company that I work for, that's one of the ways that they did things. If they were going into a new country or a new city, so I'd learned to do market research. I also wasn't in a massive hurry, and the way that I wanted to acquire businesses through vendor take-back takes time anyway. So it was like I just wanted to kind of get my feet wet, get a feel for things, and I was only going to bartend for a short time before I got into doing some consulting because, again, I was good at that. If there's any sort of wannabe consultants out there, I get calls all the time about how do you get going and everything else. I always say the same thing, and I don't think anyone ever does it, but it worked like crazy for me, is that I would knock on the door of a place. You got to have 2 or 3 really tight skill sets. You got to be able to drive an outcome in 2 or 3 areas. I was able to knock on the door and say, listen, I'm going to take a small retainer, and we're going to measure this thing, and then I'm going to take 50% of the money that I generate for you. And you're going to I'm going to pay you, I would say to them. Not many people say no to that. And they say, well, what happens if it doesn't happen? I said, I'll even refund the retainer. It costs you nothing. Right. And so the 3 areas that when I went to Sydney, there's a lot of things that I can do. And I kind of wrote it all up in the programming that became Business of Bars with the Agio. But prior to that, the 3 things that I was doing, talking about bottling that hospitality, right? So figuring that out, I have a formula for that. And you have to work with the owners. You have to find out from their guests what matters and so on and so forth. So I got that in place. And then secondly, how do you deliver it, right? How do you induct people through? How do you measure it on the floor? How do you make it count? And how do you amplify it? And then the third part was bars and restaurants, as you know, typically take 80% of their revenue during 20% of their hours of operation.
Right.
So I'm really good in that space. And assuming that a restaurant is profitable, let's say it makes $1 a year, all right, makes money. Assuming that, and they're doing, in that peak hours, we're talking typically about 18 to 20 hours a week. If we can raise that revenue ceiling, every dollar that we make over and above that's worth about 70 cents to the restaurant. So if a business was making 10% a year before, I could typically take a business to 20 or 30%.
Just in that 20% period
Yeah.
where the business is most.
Yeah, there's a formula for that.
And I mean, doing just a little bit of research, I only give myself an hour to do research because I try not to know too much about my guests because I find myself steering the conversation.
Right.
But you focus on identifying the right people, process, and increasing profit.
Right.
Is that what you just like?
Yeah.
You didn't say it quite the same way,
Yeah.
but it sounds very similar. And that,
Yeah.
but you knew this back then, going back to the early 90s. Or at this point, it would have been the late 90s.
Think about that. At 12 years old, I started to think about why restaurants work. And on the converse, why do they fail? Right? I've been thinking about this since I was 12. And then building this formula to say, how could we make this restaurant work? Why is it failing? How do we relieve that?
So why do restaurants work and why do they fail?
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't start. If you look at, I think one of the best minds in business today is Charlie Munger, who's Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway. And Charlie Munger's famous for inverse thinking, to say, well, before we try to figure out this business and how to make it work, let's think about every way that we could make it fail, right? Or what would make a relationship fail? Or what would make your health fail? Well, if you ate all the wrong food, you did no exercise, you never stretched, you got poor. Okay, so let's address all those things. Let's build systems into those things. Right, so that's what I did with restaurants.
Yeah. So looking at the elements that need to exist and making sure that there's systems and processes in place to do those things consistently.
That's right. Yeah. Installing a business system and the tool suite that I built over the years, it's much like a car. You could put a new carburetor on and you're going to get better performance. Right. But, you really got to replace all the critical parts or rebuild them to get a business to start to perform at an optimal level.
And this, I wasn't planning on going into this interview pitching my sponsor, but this is one of the reasons why I love Restaurant Systems Pro so much, is because I think that people hire consultants or outside work or they purchase a tool or system to solve problems, and they think that just by making that monthly payment, their problems are going to go away. But the thing is, it's like the restaurant industry is hard work. There's no getting around doing the work. It's an obstacle, and the only way to the other side is through it. And systems and processes is the path. It's the way through it.
Right.
And that's why I love Restaurant Systems Pro, because it literally maps out, like, these are the core systems every restaurant has, and this is our step-by-step process to do it to the way we know it's done best. And then they put you on that path, and you're forced to go through the obstacles to do the work that's necessary. And that kind of sounds like that's what you do, is you take the time to look at these restaurants or these bars, figure out what they were missing, and then help them through the path.
Yeah, as a business coach today, what I do is try to help build internal strength, right? I'm trying to teach them how to do the things that I know how to do, so that when I leave, I used to be a consultant, I'd fix things and I'd leave and they'd fall down. Right. It's great for repeat business, but it's not the merry-go-round I wanted to be on.
Right.
There's too many bars and restaurants out there.
Yeah. So when you came to Australia, you were looking to open your restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So you went and you were working, you were getting... did we kind of skip over that, or we got off that path somehow?
Yeah, we haven't talked about how it launched there. So we talked about me kind of working in the industry there for a short time to get a feel for it, and then doing some consulting, right? So I got on and that was part of the plan too, to see if my theory and my systems and my tools worked in the Australian market like it has in others. And it did. This industry, it doesn't matter where you go. People bring wholesale product in the back door. They turn it in. They retail it. You create an atmosphere,
right,
and off we go.
Take care of people.
Take care of people. Yeah. So it did. It worked, and it wasn't long. My mechanism, and I don't want to get too complicated about business structure and how you acquire things, but there was no ego in it for me. So I didn't care, I couldn't afford the building, of course. I didn't have cash. And the business value, I wanted control of these businesses, right? I wanted control of the cash flow, certainly to drive the profitability. I want to control the HR, and I wanted the box. And in that, there's a great mechanism that's available in any country in a VTB, a vendor take back. So I could knock on a door, and I've studied a business, and I learned how to count customers.
That's how we got here, because you were knocking on doors and you were telling people your approach. I'll take 50%.
No, that's how I was consulting.
Okay.
But when I wanted to buy, I'd knock on doors or send a letter and I'd say, listen, I've studied your business. I do not think it's profitable, and I'm happy to give you my forecast on where I think you're at. I don't know if you have any debt or not. I'd like to take the business off your hands, and I'm willing to buy it for, I'd have to look at the books, but this is an estimate of what I think I'd be willing to pay for it, and I could leverage you out over time.
So was your strategy, so it sounds like your strategy first started with consulting and then evolved into ownership.
That's right.
So when you were the consultant, you were, and if I'm putting words into your mouth, I'm reading a lot between the lines right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably doing your homework. You're probably going to these places. You'd see, okay, good vibe, good product. They could be doing this better. So you'd probably be doing your homework as a guest. Right. I'm guessing. And then when you saw something where you're like, if I came in here and I made a little tweak here, a little tweak, so you already knew what your strategy was going to be. You try to find your ideal client, and then you would proposition them and say, okay, like, and I'm not sure if I heard how you do the profit right, but you say, if I increase your revenue by this much, I take 50% of whatever the extra is, as long as I'm working for you. So they're getting 50% of the additional revenue.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So it's a win-win, and you just do that until the contract's over.
Yeah, I had a menu back then, which I wouldn't recommend anyone doing. I think you should just do one thing, one format. But I was young and ambitious, so I had a menu. I could either come in and do this one thing.
So when you say menu, the things you could help them with?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I'd say I can just do this one thing for you, one of these three things, or all three. And at the other end of the menu, the more elaborate option for them was I could take operational control of the business in all facets and again, still pay you 50% of increased profit. And I'm using 50 as a marker. Could have been 70, it could have been 30, depending on the position of the business and what I was able to negotiate. But at the end of the day, it was a short-term proposition, usually a year, 18 months to 2 years. The proposition was this: I'll come in, you're tired, you're not doing a very good job here. I'm going to take over the business, but I'll be in charge of the business. So, often the owner was part of the problem. So I'm going to come in and take it over. And on a monthly basis, I'm going to pay you, right? And then I'm going to build all this strength internally, and you don't want to re-up at the end of the year. I hand you back the keys and off I go.
I love that.
So that's how that operation works. I carried all the risk, right? But I got a big upside on it.
So were there patterns because like, I'm sure you saw that there were the same issues in a lot of these different places that you're knocking on the doors, and you're like, if I can just tweak these certain things, probably it was associated with like labor management or upselling or things like this, like little things that you can make small tweaks and have huge back end results. Was there patterns? What were those patterns, if you saw any?
Well, there's a lot of different things out there, but a lot of businesses, there is no plan after they open, right? Like you were going to open up, it was going to be this Northern Italian, this and that. And well, our customers like Southern Italian, and we're going to have this type of team. And now we got these, like it's a mess. It's a mess. And one of my strengths is I don't get emotionally attached to a business. I do to the people, but not the business. And so I'm able to pull it back and say, listen, here's why it's not working. Here's a change we're going to make. I get everybody to decide if they're going to re-up, and they're going to sign up for what I'm doing. Let them know that, I got the name like the angel of death because I go into business. A lot of people disappear. If you weren't 100% into what I was going to do, I get it. I'm not right and you're not wrong. We're just not meant to work together. Right? So I was able to put together a pretty quick strategic plan, help them understand the brand, help them understand the values that I was now going to operate and abide by. And so were they. And if anyone stepped on those, they were going to disappear. We just had a formula for things, and it had to happen quickly.
Kind of like get on the bus or, get off situation. Like, here's how we're going to do it. Do you agree or not? And if we're not all agreeing on these things, then it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's, that sort of work. I know people that have been doing that kind of work for years and years, but it's exhausting. It's like, Launching a restaurant is a certain emotional toll and amount of energy. Turning someone else's train wreck around and trying to get back on track, and then having that person waiting in the wings, telling people when I get back and all of that. But that's how I made enough money to get my own place.
Yeah.
Right. To come in.
And then eventually you were taking the same approach. So you're going around, you're taking 50% of the additional profit that you're making. How many different clients did you have at one time?
I could only do, it wasn't even clients, it was properties that we were managing,
Okay.
So we could do, the most we had was 4 at a time.
Wow.
It was a
How
lot
long
of work.
were you doing this before?
A couple of years.
Couple of years.
Yeah.
So you land in Sydney, you start working in a couple bars to learn the market. You find some ideal clients. At one point you're working with 4 of the max. Over how many different restaurants would you say you worked with during that 2 or 3 year period?
6.
6.
Yeah.
Okay. But you had year-long contracts with some of these.
Yeah, some of them, and they were all different. And that's what I'm saying. If I was to go back in time, well, you know what? This is a good example of me not listening to my mentors.
Right.
I don't want to make out like I'm a great mentee. I'm a pretty good one, but I have ignored some fantastic advice for a tremendous cost.
What's some of the advice that you ignored?
Well, that was to say you're out of your mind to try to offer this menu and different products and different relationships. Use one contract, one methodology, one team of people, and go. Right? And it's a hotshot because my experience in London was working on a big team that had all these teams and these menus, and
so
I wasn't
kind of uniquely positioned to be able to do that, but it was still much more difficult than if you.
Yeah. So, so all of that to get to getting my first restaurant at age 27.
Damn. Age 27, a few years after moving to Sydney, you open your first restaurant. Same approach of knocking on doors and basically trying to find operations that, the writing was on the wall that this owner maybe wanted out, where all the, well, I don't want to put words into your mouth. Like, take it from there. Because I know that much is true.
So there's a very different profile between the consulting work that I did and the vendor takebacks I approached.
Okay.
And I'm not speaking for anyone's finances, but just in general, you wanted enough runway with the consulting work that they had to have enough cash to make a few of the minor changes that we needed. Had to be a viable business. They couldn't be on their way out exhausted. They didn't want to do this anymore because I did have an option to buy on a few of the places, but I probably never was going to. They just weren't my type of business. I was just able to turn them around. On the other side of the equation, and again, I hope this doesn't sound terrible, but in the VTB world, what you're doing is you're looking for people who are done, right? And again, it's opportunistic, but the people that I approach, and it was typically with letters because they weren't in those businesses anymore. They were letting someone else run them. Some of them were even closed, but they hadn't officially declared. So the 2 types of people that I get, the majority of people, when I write the letters, I explained, hey, here's how I see things. Here's what I'd be willing to do. Come in, I might be able to negotiate some of your debt down, blah, blah, blah. And the first response I would get from people was, go fuck yourself. Like, who do you think you are? You don't want to pay me for my business, or, the second type of person, which is more like the 10% group, was, I literally had people say that my wife's been praying to God that someone would come and offer to let us out of this. Right. They were trapped in the debt. They had 8 years left on their lease. They had leases with commercial equipment companies. They had dropped $500,000 into furniture. And I said, listen, I can come in and leverage you out. And best case scenario, I'm going to pay them something. But when I looked at the debt load, sometimes it was, I'm going to let you out of here.
Right. So, I mean, that's a huge lesson right there. Look to be someone's exit strategy. There are more people than you realize who are in this industry who had a dream and had no clue what it's actually like, that have turnkey operations that are looking for a way out. And if you can be their way out and then get a hell of a deal in the process.
Most of the people that I bought from had been hemorrhaging money for years. Why didn't they get out? Their ego. They were embarrassed.
Yeah.
You go hang that sign up and shut the door, and you try to sell a business that's losing $5,000 a week. Like, who's going to buy that?
So what was the first restaurant that you purchased that you actually owned?
So we were right in Darlinghurst. Sydney's famous for that big Coca-Cola sign. Right underneath that sign was a boutique hotel called L'Hotel, as was the name of the bar restaurant. So that was the first place. A really weird and awkward place. It was like a long box, like a long corridor, and it had street frontage on both sides, a few tables outside. But the very famous, I don't know if they are still today, BKH, Burley, Caton Halliday, they were called, a design firm, had used it as their first, restaurant space and designed this thing. It looked like a swimming pool, little blue tiles on the wall, dark ones, and light ones on the floor. It was shocking. It looked like a huge lap pool, and everyone that came in, and they even like filled in the shelves for perfect symmetry, and the place went under. Like, it was just a disaster. And this is one of the places I was able to take on for.
Well, I mean, just listen to you describe it. You can tell that the person who owned that was more interested in creating a space, not necessarily running a restaurant.
Absolutely. Yeah, more concerned about his relationship with some eccentric artist who was going to come in. He wasn't a restaurant guy.
Right.
Like, put it this way, behind the bar had like a shelves, cubby behind inside. He filled it all in for symmetry. So there's nowhere to put bottles.
Oh, man.
That's just one example of 20 crazy things I could tell you. So in a relationship like that, I was able to go in, write the contract, take it over. Now the landlord, the person that wanted me in, was the person that owned the building. So they're going to get the rent back. I was able to write a deal on that. And I was up and running, very little money.
What was the appeal? Going back to that, what were you, 27-year-old version of yourself, knowing what you know at this point, why this space? Why did you want it?
No emotional attachment. That's why I'm not a typical restaurateur.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit more cocky then than I am now. I could have made a lemonade stand work. You know what I mean? Like, there's a formula for it. It was one of the ugliest buildings I'd ever seen. I said to myself, if I were a customer, I wouldn't even come in here. So I've got to change it, but I couldn't change it that much because it's expensive to make those changes.
Right.
So we did just enough to kind of make it cool and interesting. And then we made something remarkable happen inside.
What?
Oh man, that was my first, and maybe that's why I'm partial to it. I'll start with the failures. We under budgeted on the change we had to make, and that hurt. I maxed out on that. Yeah, and I'm not a developer. Secondly, I thought we can compete. 18 hours a day. Sydney's got an incredible coffee culture. We had our asses handed to us there. You can't compete with the guys across the road that have been doing this 20 years,
right,
that have a loyal following, and that didn't work for us. Lunches weren't even great, but we developed 7 great dinners a week, killer Sunday brunch. Over time, Sunday became our second busiest day behind Saturday. Live music. A friend of mine was a producer there. All these young artists would come and jam at his house all the time. Brought them all down. I said, guys, I can't pay 18 musicians on a Sunday. They said, if we can eat here and have a drink or two,
so let us jam.
We'll come and jam. And it was the best Sunday jam session. So we just focus on every segment and how to make it work. But at the end of the day, it was like, back to that original formula, we knew our brand of hospitality. I hired people that would see it as an honor to take care of the type of clientele that I wanted to hire. And we brought them, most people that I hired, I would say, I don't have an exact stat, but I'd say that 80% of the people that I hired had zero industry experience. Wow. I hired them from Blockbuster, Hertz Rent-A-Car, the local grocery store, a kid who I saw, hustling, helping someone take their rubbish out, 20 years old, and said, hey, where do you work? And I'm working down at the paint store. Have you ever thought about working in the restaurant industry? I got a 6-month induction program. After that, here's how it all works. Come in once a month on Tuesday night. We show people how we do this. So it's how we built teams. And it was an awesome thing. You get one, and then it just builds and builds.
So when you say we look at every segment, what do you mean by segment? Break that word down a little bit more.
Yeah, so when I work with my coaching clients today, one of the biggest mistakes and biggest blown opportunity that both bar and restaurant operators have is they'll get Friday night, Saturday night cranking, and then they'll turn their back on that and start to look at, well, what do we do Wednesday lunch, or should we do a bingo night on Monday? And like I said earlier, I go in that business and say, okay, you're taking 80% of your revenue in these 2 blocks, and let's put Thursday for these 2 peak hours in. And if at the moment you are producing $5,000 per hour in that block, what's it take to get it to 6? Because if we can get it to 6, $700 of that 1,000 that we had on is pure profit.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that hour after hour after hour, so we first look to optimize peak hours, and then we set a pro forma in place that kind of allows the leadership team to manage around that, right? So, an example is that you'll know that this particular bar caps out at $2,000 an hour. And so, our benchmark is we never want to see it drop below 1,800. And if it does, at the post shift, we're going to find out and analyze what happened. And you could see sometimes it's like a bar back had an off day. The manager on duty was at a breakup and wasn't available. Or when we put our two best bartenders together, we typically do $400 less an hour than when we put our A bartender and our B bartender together, right? One's on high output, one's more the face of the business, and back and forth they go. So it's chess rather than checkers.
So you set these standards based off the data, the numbers. At the end of the day, you run the numbers, and immediately you would know if you were at an off day, and you would try to solve it in that moment, and you would look for patterns. When you found the pattern, you'd create a new standard operating protocol.
Right. Yeah.
To make sure that never happened again.
Yeah, we'd look at the soft spot and say, what's a system that we build in around here? What awareness do we have to have here? What reporting do we have? And then when I step back from it, who's going to captain this segment, right? Who's going to run this block of business for us and constantly look to take it up, 5% a quarter.
Got it.
Right.
When did you own? You're 27 years old, but what year was that?
So I'm born in 73. So 93 is 20. So this is like 2000.
2000. So you
2001.
opened Barmetrix in 99. So Barmetrix came before.
So
that was when you were consulting.
Yeah. So Barmetrix was, I needed a tool to measure inventory a lot better than I was. My assumption, and it was kind of a crude assumption, but I took the time to kind of verify, and we were losing around 12 to 14% of our liquid, and I didn't know why. I thought I had a pretty honest team, I couldn't put my finger on it. And there was 2 or 3 different beverage inventory control companies that I tried, and I found myself wasting more time with them. Like, they just didn't have the technology to do it, and they didn't have the know-how. So again, this is another mistake, not listening to my advisors. I'll just build a software tool. And this is early days software, right? So they're like, Sean, do not do this.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most expensive mistakes I ever made. And it turned into a company, a global company that I'm very proud of. But man, did I have my ass handed to me in the world of software, right? We just didn't know what we didn't know. We did certain things in-house. We outsourced. We had consultants. We had a mess, and it just burned cash. So luckily, because of the restaurant business, I was making good cash, but that's dangerous when you're young too. I wasn't spending on Coke and holidays, but now I'm blowing it on software. Coke's a lot cheaper than software, I found out.
Right. Programmers aren't cheap, especially back then, because there's only a few amount of people that can do it.
Right.
So you develop basically these set of systems for running bars, and you start implementing these systems in your own business, and I'm sure you're fine tuning them in your own business, and you're selling the rights to use your systems to other bars.
So we got the prototype of the software working. So the software obviously runs on your laptop, or back then handhelds were coming out. So either digital scale, which interface with the tech, and then we're scanning the barcode. So the basic premise of it was that we're going to take a bottle of maybe vodka, and someone would say, well, that's 0.2. Someone else says 0.3. Well, that's the difference, right? Maybe that's your 10%. And when you scan it, it recognizes the tare weight of the bottle. Each bottle is unique. You put it on the scale. Now it's only measuring the liquid unit mass, and it's going to say that instead of 0.2, that there are 2 or 100 milliliters in this bottle.
Got it.
And then that all merges together with the POS, and the POS is going to tell you, of course, it reads a shot of vodka, a shot of this, a shot of that, but an old fashioned, it's 2 ounces of this, and then if you want to measure the syrup, so everything decremented down, and so we could run real time on site and find out exactly what we're missing. So my bars were running with like No bar is perfect, but we had like 1% to 2% loss.
Wow.
And when people would come in and hear about this, they'd say, hey, can you help me with it? Well, my staff in the beginning were doing that. I wasn't setting up to do this. And when I eventually did sell the restaurant company, that was really the launch of Barmetrix. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do this, or I'll get the software ready to sell or to license as a product. And so I had, 20, 25 sites in Sydney running really well with it. And when I started to hand it over, that's where it fell apart, right? Why? A few reasons. One, the owners said, hey, now I'm back to the wolves counting the sheep again, right? Like the people that are I'm trying to figure out if I can hold them accountable are now collecting the data and producing the reports. Secondly, it's not the highlight of a general manager of a bar or restaurant's week to get on his hands and knees and go, it's just not their job, or not what they signed up for.
Right.
And therefore anything I don't want to do, I don't do very well. Right. So, and then finally, this is around the beginning of the product explosion. So now instead of having 200 SKUs or 400 SKUs, the businesses have got 800 different products. Some bars, restaurants had 2,000, 4,000 wines.
Wow.
So managing a database of that size is a skill set in itself, right?
So all these were the different challenges. To make sure I understand, the first challenge was if you're handing, you can't trust everybody basically. If the people who are stealing from you are also creating the report, there's no way of you knowing they're stealing because they can fudge the numbers. Did I hear that right?
There's a great old expression, trust in Allah, but tie up your camel. Right.
So that was a big challenge. The second challenge was just it's a lot of work, and to get people to go through all the motions was a challenge.
Yeah. Not only a lot of work, but like
running restaurants.
Yeah. But like if you have a spreadsheet and I just poke a couple holes in it, or I put a couple pieces of bad data in it, the whole thing's wrong.
Right.
Right. So that was a problem. And these guys, they're like, okay, now I got to go back and double check all my work. And then I got to be at work in an hour. So that was a problem. And
then the third challenge was just the cultural shift that was happening with these just outrageous inventories that were starting to emerge.
Right. So if you're managing a database of 200 in Excel spreadsheet, you can do that. You put it up to 800, and then different lines, So now it's Smirnoff strawberries, Smirnoff this, and then you get into wines. For example, I think it's French wines. There's no law to have a barcode. Right. So, okay. So now we got these wines. And so now you're typing in the names, French names at that, so.
Don't even start with French names, man. Especially being dyslexic, like I see some of those things. Right. I just can't make it happen.
And selecting something's one thing, adding a new product's a complexity. Because then you got to put the name, the varietal, the year, and you put that in wrong. You can just see now you've got a pot of spaghetti in front of you.
Yeah, I can see that happening fast. So was this around the time where you think to yourself, the solution is to franchise this and to get people that if this thing has legs, if Barmetrix is going to have legs, it's going to be as a franchise where I have franchisees all over the country who are going in and actually doing the work for the restaurant. It's not just the technology, but it's a service and technology.
Well, so here's what happened. I built the restaurant group up we had 8 properties under management.
How long did it take you to get to those 8 properties?
The first 6.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We just kind of took them one after the other. And then I had an offer. My daughter was born. So Macy was born in Sydney. So was my son, Reese. My other 2 kids, one was born in Canada and one was born here in the States. But when my 2 eldest kids were born, I realized being a restaurateur, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not built for it. I'm the kind of guy that like a psychopath. I'll have a place that's profitable at 40 grand. It's doing 70 or 80, and I'm sitting out in front of it on a Tuesday night wondering what I'm going to do. Right? Like I'm never happy.
Right.
And I mean it when I say that is not a healthy condition as a human being. Right. At some point you got to realize if I got something making 20 points, it's growing quarter on quarter. Let it be. And that's just not in my DNA. So I had someone who wanted to buy a couple of the properties. I said, they're not for sale. I just happened to have a board meeting a day or 2 later, and I told them about it, and they're like, well, yeah, isn't everything for sale? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What would they pay for? Because without me, and they're like, no, we think you've done a good job of systematizing it, and you've put some good leadership in and whatever. And And so we decided that I was going to bundle it, and they could have all 8, and then they could, do what they wanted with the properties they didn't really want. But I wasn't gonna start going backwards and then picking up more. Like I said, with my kids, I was already like, yeah, if there's an opportunity to get out of here. So I did. I sold the group right around the time that like my phone was ringing off the hook for Barmetrix. People saying, but here's the thing. I started also in the restaurant ownership track. I started coaching back then. I was trying to help other operators to kind of avoid some of the pain that I had, teach them some of the things that I had learned, and I loved it. It's what I did for free as far as business wise. So they say, you know what you'd love to do if you do it for free. And so I said to my board, I think I'm going to sell the group, sell the software to somebody else, and get into coaching. They said, well, what evidence do you have that the market's willing to pay for coaching? Where does it work? I looked around the US, UK. Yeah, there were some individuals with big names, but no one had made a leveraged business with it. And again, the benefit of a board, one of the board members said, well, if you plug this software in, said, well, first off, he said, what would your services cost per year? And I can't remember back then, but let's say it was $20,000 to coach an owner of a restaurant or a bar. And he said, well, and what would, if you plugged your software in and ran that service, what would that make them in a year? It turned out around the same number or even more. And they said, wouldn't that be the way in? Just to go in and say, hey, if you plug this in, you're going to generate this. And then with my coaching, you're going to make more money on the back end. You're going to kind of reinvest in yourself. And I mean, it took off like a rocket. We went from Sydney. The goal was 100 clients. By the time we got to 70, we were getting ready to open our next office in Melbourne, and then Brisbane. And then, I feel like Forrest Gump, but next thing you know, I'm flying back to come back to North America, set up offices across Canada, the UK, and then we're in 8 countries.
After telling your mom
26
you're never
cities.
coming back.
Yeah, well, I was only back for about 18 months to set up a few businesses.
So, and I think it's important to point out too, we kind of picked this up from the interview I recorded with Dave Domzalski alone.
Yeah.
So Dave was the first Dave I had on the show.
Yeah.
Before I did the interview with Dave Nitzel and Dave Domzalski together when their second book, Hospitality DNA, dropped.
That's a lot of Daves.
That's a lot of Daves.
Yeah.
But what I got from the first conversation with Dave Domzalski was that Barmetrix is a software and it's a process to manage your inventory, specifically your alcohol inventory. But it's more than that, because you have people that come in. It's not like you buy the rights to Barmetrix and your team is in there doing all the stuff. You're contracting out inventory. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, it's they're coaching you up on best practices. So they're looking at they get the data,
yeah,
and they say there's something off here. Let's go find out where it's going.
Yeah.
So part of it is yes, measurement, but the other part of it is correcting.
That's right. Yeah. So they definitely have the best tools to capture that data and create that awareness. And not only that, to reconcile on site, which was a key part of the process, so that, I never liked the idea of a contractor coming to my business telling me, I got all these problems that no one else can really see. And that's the way it is, and walk out. Now I'm fighting with my internal management and an external contractor. So the way I designed it was, hey, we're going to come in. We'll get in at 6 o'clock in the morning. At 8:30, we'll be ready for whoever's going to sign off on this. And then they say, well, I want to challenge this. Okay, let's go look at that. And sometimes, you pull that TV and behind it is another cupboard that you put in last week or that we didn't know was there, whatever.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you take ownership of the data before we leave. And then we help you build a strategic plan to go after and get that money.
Right.
So that's one problem you solve. But with Barmetrix, the way I set it up was that I had this whole other tool set. Everything I'd learned was say, hey, here it is. Help your clients this way. So it's different offices do different things, right? Some guys like the systematized machine that they just go in. I pump out. I do 40 audits a week. Get paid. My guys go and do all the work. I meet with clients sometimes. Other guys do less audits, and they'll, like Dave and Dave, will do more coaching and consulting.
Got it. What I'm curious. What on average, what percentage were your clients off by? You said that you at one point you'd get yours within like 10 to 12% off, and you couldn't figure out. But like on average, when you have somebody who's new, like are they in like the 30, 40 percentile as far as like the alcohol they're losing? Like what's a common number to see?
So we had exclusive or extensive data in 8 countries, and it's different country by country.
Which country's the worst?
The U.S. by far. Yeah, you pay people the least amount of money,
Right.
and give them the most autonomy, right? What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
Australia, for example, sits around 10%, 8 to 10%. So that's direct loss. You buy 10 bottles of vodka, one of them's gone.
Yeah.
U.S. sits around 20%, and it depending on the type of bar, depending on the owner's involvement in the business, et cetera, but 20% is not uncommon at all. Some places are 30 or 40.
Wow.
But at 20%, every Barmetrix office, you could ask them for their numbers, and they'll tell you what our average client does. But it's not uncommon to have that client sit down at 2% for year after year.
So just putting this system in place, and your employees becoming aware that they're tracking it.
Yeah.
How much of an impact does that have? Like, how many points will be shed in just like that first month? People knowing they're being monitored.
Yeah, I'll first say that that the losses that this industry occurs. Is there theft here? Absolutely. There's people that steal things and give things away and feel that it's justified. 20% in the U.S. on the beverage side, 10% on the food side. Right? You pay grown men and women to come into work and pay them nothing. They don't eat at home.
Right.
They come in and they eat at work, and when the 2 days off, it's not uncommon not to eat anything or eat one meal in that time.
Right.
It's what I would do. Right? If you're starving me to death by paying me in Washington, D.C., $10 an hour, right? How you're going to earn $80 in a shift? It's just the math doesn't work. That said, what was the question? How do we get to?
I think the original question was just from implementing the system.
Yeah, with the awareness. Yeah. Sorry. So with the awareness, you've worked in bars and restaurants, right?
Yeah.
So there's only 2 types of bars and restaurants. One type, if you're my friend and you come in and I give you a bottle of water, and your 2 friends, the 2 girls, these 2 drinks are for them, and no one ever says anything about it. That's one type. The other type is 6 days later, this guy Dave Domzalski came in here. 6 days later, someone says, "Does anyone know what happened to 1 bottle of water and 2 shots of this?" People that like make a living stealing do not work at bar 2.
Right.
Why would you?
Right. Yeah.
Because 95% of them are bar 1.
Right.
Right. So, and having said all that, a lot of people drink behind the bar, and you build up a tolerance that way. A lot of people think, well, you don't take care of me, so I'm going to take care of my friends.
Right.
There's a lot of justified theft, but there's also a ton of overpouring.
That's a big part of it too.
Huge.
Just people just not knowing how to pour, But I mean, what gets measured gets minded, right? And I mean, we're not here to sell Barmetrix. It's a great tool. I think the Dave's did a good job.
Already sold the company.
And you already sold it. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, anything in the from owning your first location to your 8th location, key lessons, key evolutions for you?
Yeah, well, oh my God, so many.
Time's going by so fast too. I can't believe we're already an hour and a half of recording time. That's crazy.
Yeah, so I guess a few of the big lessons for those that do want to scale up is to what I wouldn't do again is all 8 of them were all different. Bar, restaurant, dive bar. Like I was an opportunist, right? So I wasn't. It was a mathematical and a financial formula, not business side. Of course, I had to be able to make the box work, but it was a box. I wouldn't do that again. I would pick kind of 1 or 2 types of business and scale those. I'd look for those. I'd be much more selective. A few reasons for that. It's just complicated to run,
right.
Multifaceted, multi-brand businesses. I always thought if we had this core culture and this credo that we all live by, that I'd be able to move people place to place. It's not the case.
Right.
Staff that I loved that were so helpful, they're like, "Sean, please never make me go back to that dive bar again. Or I can't work 1 more hour in that nightclub."
Yeah.
Right? So for me, I'd do that. I'd uniform.
People aren't cogs in a wheel.
No. And you like what you like, right? Like
can't swap out parts.
Yeah. So that's one thing. 2 is I would have been more patient. I think that the owners that I work with today that I really admire are just a lot more patient. They're a lot more selective. They have a much more healthy life. than I did then, and than I did even later in life. Because they are patient, right? They're not at their venue on Tuesday wondering what they're going to do to get Tuesdays cranking, right?
Right.
They're able to breathe and all of that. And I guess the last kind of major thing in the scale up was, even though I had a board in place, I did not start with the end in mind. Back then the growth was driven by ignorance and ego, right? 100 bars and restaurants. Why 100? Because it's a stupid thing to say. It's just bigger than 6, than 7, than 8.
Would you say earlier, like people go to work for companies doing outrageous things? You got to be outrageous. Were you just trying to be outrageous at that point?
No, as a kid, I was a immature, like, if you can do this many, well, then certainly you can do more.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's apparently not the way to run a business. And now I help clients and say, hey, listen, like, if nothing else, like if something happens to you, how does this business go if your husband has to take it over, or your wife, or your daughter? And I tell you, for a lot of people, it's the first time they've thought about, like, how do you get out of here?
Right.
And the subconscious thought is, I'm going to keep doing this, and it's going to become more valuable, and then someone's going to give me a big check one day. And not everyone's that fortunate.
Right. The exit strategy, I like to say, is death.
Yeah. Yeah.
For most people, that's the plan.
That's right.
They just do it until they can't do it anymore.
And when you have that destination point in mind, as a coach today, like it's everything. It's a North Star, right? It's what drives us towards that, and without it, it's just more. More is the business plan.
Right.
And at some point, more becomes too much.
Right. And I love that one of the biggest lessons you had was this idea of just not trying to be everything to everyone, and just really focusing on one thing. I think Kathleen Wood calls it the one thing. I'm getting more and more friendly with Ed Doherty, and he talks about 1 degree, and there's this reoccurring theme coming up of be really good at doing one thing and do it better than anybody else, and just once you can't get it any better, scale it,
right, and
then give it legs. My outlook on what I would do if I was opening a restaurant has absolutely changed. Kind of like you, after studying the industry for so many years, I wonder if I still want to open a restaurant. Like, is this really what I want to do? Like, becoming more self-aware and actually understanding the industry today, like, and just what it takes. Like, man.
Well, let me ask you: if you were open a restaurant, why would you want to do that? Like, what would compel you to open a restaurant?
For me, it's always been the people. I think when I was younger, it was a little bit about ego and being. Everyone loves to be seen.
So what would your interaction with the people be if you're the restaurant owner?
Not that much.
Right.
But really, it's restaurant people that I love. It's the like you, much like you.
Come in? Or the staff?
It's the staff. It's the misfits. It's the people who are the truest versions of themselves, and they find a place that they fit in the restaurant industry. And that's really why I started. So I resigned from aviation, was a commercial pilot, went back to school for marketing and hospitality, wanted to work in restaurants, couldn't because I was $200,000 in school loan debt. And I said, if I can't work in restaurants, I want to work with restaurants because I love restaurant people,
right? Because
they're my kind of people. I'll get into sales. And it was my time learning and considering becoming a wine salesman that I discovered podcasts. And I was like, you mean there's an opportunity where I can just travel and talk to people?
Right.
People that I love, restaurant people, sign me up for that. And I thought to myself, if I can learn and generate enough revenue with the podcast, learning and helping enough other people become successful through the podcast, then I can take that revenue to open my own restaurant. And I'll have a whole bunch of lessons along the way.
Okay.
And I might have just been talked out of it.
Well, have you read the E-Myth?
Yes.
Okay. So that I suggest anyone looking to get in, you're going to become the mechanic that becomes the garage owner. And you no longer get to work on cars. You no longer get to talk to customers. Right. You no longer get to hang out with mechanics.
Yeah. If your thing is making pies, you're going to be too busy working on the business, not making pies.
Yeah. And I'm not being humble when I say that I wasn't great at food. I wasn't great at cocktails. I wasn't great at interior design. I went into the business to build misfit teams, and that's what I did.
So your strength is building teams.
Yeah, and then wrapping
social emotional intelligence.
A system around that almost guarantees our success.
What does that look like? The wrapping a system around it. I don't know if we've really gotten into that yet.
Well, we've touched on it. So if you look at how a business works. So, for example, why do, again, back to inverse thinking, why do restaurants fail?
So many different reasons.
What's the main one? What do you think?
Why do restaurants fail? Lack of profitability.
Yeah, well, that's the ultimate scoreboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what leads to that?
What leads to it? I mean, it could be so many different things, but I mean, you think I'd have just just a committed answer to that question, but mostly I talk to people who succeed. They fail just because of the people problems. I think it's a matter of getting burnt out because they have to do everything all the time and they don't have the people and the processes in place, and they're just caught treading water.
So that's part of it. And if you were to Google, why do restaurants fail, the top 20 answers, the number one answer is not in there. Like that's why 8 out of 10 fail, that no one really knows why they fail. It's like this enigma that's out there.
I think what is your answer? I'm curious.
Well, I know because I've studied 2,500 businesses. So I know with certainty why restaurants fail. And I'm going to tell you, here it is. And let's put ourselves in a banker's shoes, right? If we were the bank and you and I were young strapping entrepreneurs, we went to Mr. Banker and said, hey, we want to borrow $1 million to open up this restaurant. It's going to be awesome, right? It's going to have food. It's going to have drinks, 4 walls of ceiling, right? Probably some tables and chairs. And he'd be looking at you going, yeah. And you want money from you. What's the risk involved in this? Well, here's the deal. We're going to sell beer, and it's going to be $9 a pint. That's going to be one of our offerings. And if we're to look at the breakup of a beer and we cut it in 3, the customer knows they're paying about 1/3 of it for the beer, right? We've all bought it before. We know it costs money. 1/3 of it's going to be for what's around us, the fit out, the chairs, the whole deal. And 1/3 of it is going to be for how we feel on a subconscious level about our time in that space. And if I go to your place once, twice, certainly 3 times, and I don't get that feeling, right? The definition of hospitality in my mind is how a person feels about themselves while they're in that space. Do I feel seen? Do I feel welcome at the highest level? Do I feel loved by these people, right? Are they excited to see me? Or do I feel invisible, like an inconvenience, So this is what makes a business work. And the bank manager goes, man, this is awesome. Good. Who's going to deliver that? Oh, great. Timmy.
Can I give you my answer before we go in first? Because I feel like I know the answer. I think it's having people-dependent organizations and not system-dependent organizations.
So the number one reason is that hospitality, the way someone feels about themselves, is the main determining factor in whether a guest returns to that business.
Which is dependent on
hospitality, a connection between 2 human beings, the way that I feel, a reason to return. So let me tell you how we overcome this in a second.
Yeah.
But let's just stay with the banker. We say, okay, so you're the key product, the key determining factor is this feeling that people have, right? So, and you can't guarantee it. You can guarantee money with a fit out. You can guarantee money with a product, but you can't guarantee this. So
people are unpredictable.
You got to count on. And so he says, hey, tell me a little bit about the staff. Well, they're 24, 26 years old. They don't want to work here. They do not want to work here, right? They want to be in Hollywood. They want to be elsewhere. So they must be emotional giants, right? Where do they train for this work? They've never trained for it. Billy broke up with his girlfriend via text. They were together for 2 years. He broke up via text because he didn't want to have that emotional conflict with her. You know what I mean? So that's our front man on this incredible ask to get this person to come back and see us based on the feeling that he had interacting with you. That's what the business is all about. Most people don't understand that.
Yeah.
Right?
So they fail because they don't deliver that the hospitality. Is that the answer?
That's right.
Yeah.
They fail because they don't give the customer 1/3 of what they're paying for. And if I didn't get 1/3 of what I was paying for at your restaurant once, you might have made a mistake. Twice, I'm not coming back.
Right.
And you know why? Because we don't have a contract, and I can go to the next place and the next place and the next place. And worse than that, if you really let me down, I'm going to punish you online. I'm going to tell everyone that you screwed me. Mm-hmm. And I can't say, because it's a subconscious play, I can't even say that I didn't get the attention that I was looking for. I didn't get the feeling I was looking for. I've got to say I didn't like the cocktail. I didn't like the fit. I didn't like the look on someone's face.
But the truth is, you didn't feel seen.
There was something missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was something missing.
I'm loving the conversation so much that I forgot to take another break to thank our sponsors. So we're going to have to do that now, and we'll come back to unpackage this a little bit more, to talk about where you are today, what the business looks like today, and where we're going. And hopefully we can help you connect with some of our listeners as well.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now, Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We're back. So you just kind of spelled out to us the number one reason why restaurants fail, because they don't see their people. And I think I 100% agree with that. And I think the reason why I think having people-dependent organizations over system-dependent organizations can be a challenge for what you just shared is because the amount of turnover, like we go to a restaurant to be seen because of the relationships, right? And then when those people leave, there isn't a system for the next generation of person to come in and operate at that same level.
Right.
So you become dependent on these individuals, and when they leave, that magic leaves with them.
Yeah, and it's even more complicated than that.
I'm sure
I think hopefully I can make it simple. Think about 3 circles that are connecting together.
And
right?
diagrams.
Yeah. One of the circles is your brand of hospitality.
Got it.
Right? The next one is your team member. So bartender, server, their character type, their values, and so forth. And the third is the guests that you're serving, that constituency. Right? Those 3 things have to come together. Remember what I said with Hard Rock? They said, hey, if the guests, we can't control the guest type. So if 20% hate us, he was fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's how it's got to be. You got to play to the top. You got to play to the drop-in guest, turn into a raving fan. Right? And like I said about my staff earlier, that I could take staff from a pub and send him into the nightclub. Like this is an amazing person who I'd want to spend time with my kids. He goes to the nightclub. He's miserable. Right? Like we bounce around and go place to place. And then that brand of hospitality, if you think about 3 different types of potential staff member coming in to work for you, if you're able to articulate your brand of hospitality, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is how we make people feel, this is how. There's 3 types of people. You're going to put them into one of 3 buckets in front of you. The bartenders who's applying, you'll either determine that, man, this guy'd hate doing this. They're going to look at you and go, what? Wow, that doesn't sound cool. The second type will probably be able to bring enough emotional energy to the shift to deliver on that. Problem is they get whacked in the teeth 2 or 3 times by a disgruntled guest, and 2-3 hours left, they're going to be miserable, and you're going to start seeing negative feedback online. But the third, and in my experience, that's about 5% of people that apply. The third is someone who will actually get high delivering that brand of hospitality. They'll love what you're doing and think it's cool and fun, and they'll have tons of energy at the end of the shift, emotional energy. Right? So you got to get all 3 of those things right to deliver on number 1. So that's the hospitality aspect. I said there was a main reason. Most people haven't figured this out yet, or how to deliver it and how to scale it. But I didn't hire a bartender or server or host. We had a front of house team and a back of house team. I said, if you work in the front of house, no matter what you do, you're going to do 3 things. You're going to learn our playbook for hospitality. We're not going to treat all people the same. Constituency 1, I can show you the playbooks on these. This is how these people, I'm writing a book on this right now. This is how these people enjoy. This is what they love. This is what they hate. This is how we do it. Constituency 2 and 3. If you're complicated, 4 and 5. But let's just say we've got that in play. Okay? So that's what you're going to deliver. That's our hospitality. Number 2 is if you work front of house, I make clear up front that I was a for-profit business, right? It wasn't a charity. We couldn't lose money. But I also really believe that sales is a key to hospitality. Like being able to take someone through our full offer is a gift, right? Being able to read someone and not pushing them into an upsell or doing this or doing, just be able to guide them, be a great steward of our offer. All right, so I'm going to teach you how to sell with dignity. And number 3, you're also in our marketing department, because the best person to market to come back in the future is already sitting right in our restaurant.
Right.
So I said with each and every person, we're going to watch them, we're going to study them, and before they leave, we're going to map them to a future experience. And we had those experiences, right? This particular customer type would enjoy this sort of thing. And full court press, we would invite them to that And I said, if we don't have anything to map them to, chivalry. Walk them to the door, be kind, be cool, and say, hey, I would really love to see you again. You guys should come back and see me.
What is it about the current, I guess, or the new emerging generation that's so adverse to profit and think that putting profit high on a priority is almost like a bad thing?
Yeah, I think, I think the kids that I talk to that really don't have that mindset, and I'm sure there are some. I think profit in the absence of any sort of other goal or moral is a tough thing. People that are lining up to work at SpaceX don't think, I don't want to work for Elon Musk. He's the richest man in the world. Don't give a shit. They want to work for something exciting.
Right.
Work underneath a maverick and a leader that's literally going to Mars.
Right. I think there's this misunderstanding of how profit works, and when organizations prioritize profit, should it be number one? No. There should be some type of overarching purpose, mission, people, but you need profit to take care, to be fiscally, to be responsible, to provide security. You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security is right there over the physiological needs. I need to feel safe. You can't let or make people feel safe unless you can provide that security to them.
Yeah, I think that, well, let me talk about the poor owners for a second, and I say that jokingly. I was one. I work with them every day now. Owning a bar or restaurant is one of the highest risk assets, and not even just because 8 out of 10 go broke. People choke on a chicken bone,
Right.
and they want to come after your house where your kids live. Unfortunately, people, things happen in your restaurant that people want to hold you accountable for that may or may not be within your
They
control.
leave your restaurant, they get in a car accident.
That's it,
and
right?
You're on the hook.
So with my clients, I say, if you can't over time make 20 points out of your business, I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't. I just don't think it's worth it to make 5 or 10% or make 5 one year and lose 5 the next. That's just my personal opinion. However, where profit does become a dirty word is if you're raking a lot of money out of your business and you are not taking care of your people.
Right.
You're paying adults $9 an hour. People say, well, that's the minimum wage. Well, you don't have to pay the minimum wage.
Right.
Right. You do well.
I think they should get rid of minimum wage, because in my mind, minimum wage is people justify paying people that because it's like saying this is okay. But if you remove minimum wage, I think the market's going to determine what's okay.
Well, hopefully responsible adults can get it in the right place. When there was no minimum wage, people paid $2 an hour, right? That's the problem. The people take advantage of people if there's no...
But can you get away with that today? Because there weren't things like Monster.com back then where you could see what people were paying. You know what I'm saying? Like, would you go take the job for that person that was paying $2 an hour?
I don't know. I spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and it breaks my heart to meet people that don't have a voice, right? If they weren't getting paid properly and they're being abused, whatever it might be, like they just don't have a voice, or they're afraid to speak up for a lot of reasons. And I think, though, that like a healthy, profitable restaurant should be an inclusive package, right? You should be educating and advancing your people. I'm not saying you got to pay people 5 times but take care of people, and that is a profitable business. Right, I'll give you an example. My kitchen at the first place I mentioned in Australia, we did a few things. Most of our staff, back of house staff, there were Thai, and it's very common in Australia. We started developing a program to advance these people. So first off, I said no dead end jobs. You want to dishwash, fine, but after a certain amount of time, you got to be moving up. In order to move up, you're going to hit a point where you have to interact in English with people. So you can't make people learn a language, but I said, if you want to work here and you want to advance, we offered English on Tuesdays and Thursdays as a second language.
Mm-hmm.
We said, okay, we looked at the kitchen, the schematic, and if this station here takes 5 people, if we can do it with 4, right? Because if we had 5 people, 2 A's, a B, and 2 C's, 4 A's outperform that group any day of the week. And I said, with that 20%, we'll spread it across, and you guys will make that wage across you, if you can do it safely and sustainably, right? So I always look for ways. We had an education budget for them. We had bonus opportunities for them. So someone might be listening and say, wow, that sounds expensive. I can barely manage my kitchen. We ran our kitchen with 20% less people, almost no sick days, the incredible culture. And whenever we did have a job fair, we had a lineup down the block, right? We bought them new boots every 12 months, industrial boots to work in the kitchen, right? Low cost, high impact things to
Right.
help build people, to build businesses.
Just show them you care.
Yeah.
You know?
We did care, but we wanted to be meaningful, that their family saw that we cared,
Yeah.
right? And that we were genuinely taking care of them. And how do we know what they wanted? We just asked them.
Right. But I mean, like, yeah, but like you need to be profitable to do these things, to pay people. That's the whole thing. Like, you need wealth to spread wealth.
It's like a ratcheting effect, right? Like, you know, people that take advantage for a long time, burn their industry reputation and make some money, and then they're going to start doing the right thing. No one believes them. They think it's a trick. You do what you can when you can, and you budget, and you're honest with people. And even before I knew what open books management was, I was running open books only because I expanded too fast. And people thought I was some trust fund kid. And trust me, my parents still live in the house I lived in when I was a kid, right? I'm like, here's how the business is doing. And they were like, my fear was they were all going to leave me. And you know what happened? They all rallied around me. They all said, hey, we can do this.
Yeah.
And everyone's behavior changed a little bit. And that discretional effort from each person raised just a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love this, man. Where is Sean Finter today? What is your life today?
Life today, you know, living in Annapolis, Maryland.
I love Annapolis, by the way.
It's a cool little town.
Never been here. Heard of it a bunch. Was riding my bike around yesterday. It's a cool little town, man.
It is.
I really like it here.
It's a little cobblestone
appeal.
town, the capital of Maryland. We're on the Chesapeake Bay. So we're now in the Franklin House, which is my office and function center, and we've got a couple of bars in here. It's a passion project for me. It's a 115-year-old house that I love, and
it's a cool house.
Yeah. So we've got this place. I live 8 miles away on the Chesapeake Bay, and just waiting out my kids. They're kind of, the youngest one's going into high school soon.
4 more years.
Yeah. So we got the countdown clock. But you know, Allie and I, we travel a lot for work and speaking, and but the main thing for me now is I coach. I coach a group of bar and restaurant operators. With COVID, obviously, I put everything online, did everything I could for free, and helped the industry out. So I'm back now to coaching, you know, from people you've never heard of that have one venue that want to have 2 or 3, other people that have a couple and they want to retire in 2 or 3 years, to
Jack McGarry was trying to scale across the country.
Jack McGarry, Dead Rabbit. I've loved working with Jack. We've worked together for a number of years. Said Moses, who's part of the group with Pouring with Heart.
Another past guest on the show, Love Said. His book, is Pouring with Heart.
Pouring with Heart. Now he's got Leading with Heart. He's writing right now.
Nice.
So yeah, I work with a range of clients, and I love it.
I'll have to reconnect with Said when I'm out west.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah. Do you know when his book is going to be released?
He's still writing, so probably 6 months or 8 months or so.
Nice. I think there was a photo of you online, or a photo of him on your Instagram, I noticed, I think, or maybe
so yeah, with the coaching group, we get them all together here 2 or 3 times a year, and we do like kind of an intense 2 days together. 2.5 days. And so he was in for that. Yeah, it's awesome. And like I built the group because, you know, despite the success I had in Sydney, there's still a lot of pain inside, a lot of mistakes. And I was very alone, right? Like, you could talk all day about mentors, but that's an hour a month. And there wasn't any group that I could join. I joined Entrepreneurs Organization, but I was the only restaurateur in it.
Yeah.
So I developed the group that I wish I had at that time. And it's a formula of a few things. Obviously, number one, with me, they get all my systems. I coach them how to implement, coach their teams how to turn their businesses around or get them cranking.
Right.
And typically they do like a project every trimester. Secondly, kind of my Rolodex is theirs. I bring in incredible speakers from inside the industry and out, so we're constantly learning. And that becomes like a de facto leadership program for their team, right? A Zoom doesn't cost them any more if you bring 8 of your managers onto it, right? So we've got that happening every month. And then the third part is just them being connected. Some of these people have been together for 5, 6, 7 years, and they're not alone. And,
right.
You know, I can honestly tell you that, like, I do everything I can, but sometimes, like, I haven't had that experience, or, you know, I've not operated a bar in Milwaukee or Los Angeles. And sometimes these guys would call each other up for help, and they were literally jump on an airplane and fly across the country and spend a couple days and bail each other out.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
I mean, that's the real challenge right there. Is it's lonely at the top. When you like even just having a group of guys or gals that you can just get thoughts out to.
Right.
Most of the time we have our answers, but we need to be able to articulate our answers. We need to be able to put them out into the universe and to have people on the receiving end of that to talk through what you're feeling and to get clarity on what to do, and having people reinforce what you're feeling, saying, yes, that's what you need to do is all you need to hear.
Yeah.
But when you don't have that network, I mean, that alone, in my opinion, is so powerful.
Yeah, it is. And without it, it's
We're hardwired for it.
Yeah. Not only are you alone, but you're also, without any sort of barometer, because every event that I run, everyone I bring in, like part of what I hope I'm good at is creating a container, where people can really share and be honest and vulnerable. And, the first time people put their numbers out, like they have no idea if this is good or bad.
Oh, it's so scary.
Right. And then we kind of benchmark them against a category and whatever, and people in the room and put them together, and they're like, oh my God, this is what people are doing. And, you could say the number was 5 out of 10 or 5 out of 100, 5%. And this guy over here is at 20. And so, what the difference is? Only these two things.
Right.
That's all he's doing. And those light bulbs and the systems, that's the best part of it.
Yeah. I love that. So Restaurant Unstoppable's mission is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. Hopefully, if we do that, we can transform the world. Where do you think we are right now, and where are we headed? What needs to change about the industry to move into a better future for all of us?
Man, a bunch of things, but I think the main thing is realizing the opportunity. It's what it always was, but it's becoming an even greater need. There's such a need for. We talk about B2B and B2C, but about H to H, human to human, right? Two people connecting, seeing each other, creating this feeling around which we generate a business. And I think that, once we have AI and we're talking to people less, I'm old enough, I'm 50 now. I'm old enough to remember when I wanted to rent a movie. I'd go down to the local movie store and I'd ask the lady that worked there the movies that she's seen or other customers.
Yeah, what's good?
Right.
Yeah.
I'd go and I worked at the gas station. People get out of their car and I would pump their gas. I would talk to them about where they're from, what they're doing. You go to the bank and you talk to a teller. All these people are gone now. You could live your life in like silence. And the human desire is to have a connection with another person. And I think that the restaurant business today, in order to foster that connection, we have to strengthen the connection between the ownership, the leadership, the management, and the staff, right? If we get that right and then build out around some of the formulas that I talked about today, I'm not saying it's impossible to fail. It's hard to fail if you build these things out right. And I don't say that in a conceited way. I've picked up enough businesses and helped them remain profitable year after year, decade now, going into a decade of play. And it's all around that philosophy.
Yeah, there's a book out there right now. It's called Team Human by Douglas Rushkoff. Are you familiar with that name?
No.
But it's this idea kind of that society with technology and AI and all these things are moving in a very unhuman direction. All the things that humans have to do today are inherently inhuman. Even social media with like Instagram and it becomes about serving the algorithm and doing what we're supposed to do to get traction, not making real human connections.
Right.
And it's just like it's like we're aware of it, but still the common narrative is you have to do it. It's necessary to be plugged into all these digital places online to use the modern platforms to be successful. You not doing it isn't an option.
Right.
And if that's true, I think there's a real issue.
Yeah.
Because all those things are inherently not human.
Right.
So we're being forced to be inhumane and act in ways that just are inherently against our nature to survive, and we have a society that's unhappy and more unsatisfied than ever before.
Right.
Because we're missing the things that you gracefully pointed out, the human connectivity of just talking to people.
Yeah.
Without do you want to go further into that?
Well, I'll just say that if you think about that pint of beer again, You know, how many venues have you forgiven because the couch has got a little rip or it's getting a bit run down? How many venues have you forgiven because the beer was a little flat or the food wasn't great tonight or whatever else? But you just love the people that work there.
Right.
It's just such a beautiful vibe when you go in. You keep going back.
Right.
You slop one of those 1/3s out, and I don't care how good the food is or how nice, but like at some point the people are dicks. They're serving you or want nothing to do with you. The minute they give you your food, they're back on their phone.
Right.
You don't go back.
Exactly.
Right. So like, and the funny thing is it's just, to me, like there's just not nearly enough focus on
100%.
that. And if you get that right, it always gets better. I'm not saying you'll win just doing that, but it'll always get better. And if you get it really right, it's hard to fail.
So is the answer to the question of where do we need to go, what needs to change, is that into a more, I guess like a more human future where we're relying less on these things and being mindful to choose the path of human interaction and not around it?
Yeah. You know, I think that if I was to just top line it and say, where do we need to change? I would say that if any owner was listening to this, that building people inside of your business is what's going to build your business, right? Like marketing, I see people pouring tons of money into marketing, paying marketing companies, and all you're doing is going out of business faster. You're just exposing more people to a poor offer.
Right.
Right. I see people spending money on a bingo night. Like
Right.
you can't compete with a guy who loves bingo.
Right.
And that is just a great vibe. And he's the owner operator. No, you're not going to compete with that. So it's like, how do we take what we have and make sure that like everyone on board is on board with what we're trying to do? And have we articulated that right? And if we have, how do we now lean in and develop
Right.
a business where we truly connect with people?
My favorite line, one of my favorite lines, is the best social platform is your dining room floor.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
And we're built for that. We're literally hardwired for that. This has been a lot of fun. Anything we did not discuss that you were hoping would come out of today's conversation? Now is the time to bring it to the conversation.
Anything we didn't discuss today? Man, we've discussed a lot. Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah. Where do you think the industry is going? If you're getting back into the business tomorrow, what would you be doing to be ready for the future?
You know, I would, the tech side of it doesn't appeal to me. We were just at a restaurant that had a robot picking up the plates.
Roombas.
Yeah, doing that. You can order off an iPad. Again, you think about the average customer who gets up in the morning, getting ready for a job he or she doesn't want to go to, sits at a table, their kids don't want to talk to them, they're on TikTok with earbuds in. Go to work, you work in your cubicle all day long, get gas, no one's there, get some money, no one's there, and get to a bar and they want you to order off an iPad and be
Right.
served by a Roomba. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So if I was going back into business, as I say, the more time goes on, the more I feel good about my model, right? I'm glad it worked then, but it'd work even better now.
I don't think your model is going anywhere. I think that there's going to be that person. I think what's going to happen is the industry is going to fragment into markets that cater towards certain needs. And I think different markets are going to have higher demand for different needs. But there's going to be that person out there, the introvert who just doesn't feel like making dinner tonight, who wants to go and have no emotional connection with anybody.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
that's going to be a market. That's going to be something. But the restaurants that, spark you up, the ones that we've been talking about, the more emotionally human element where you're going to for a relationship, I don't see those things going anywhere. I think it's one of the few industries that our product is the emotional connection.
Yeah.
And we try to sell the product is the food and the service and the drink, but really at the end of the day, like you pointed out, it's the people that we come back for. We're subconscious. We're not even aware of it.
Yeah. And as much as we enjoy the service that we get when we're there, if you think about it on the next ring out, we also want to be part of a tribe.
Right.
Right. You think about, this is a T-shirt. I've got hundreds of bar and restaurant T-shirts. This place here, I'm a fan of a pork broccoli rub sandwich they sell at a market stall in Philadelphia.
Ooh,
Why
there later this week?
They
or next week.
Go to Dinex. They won a couple of years ago, won best sandwich in the country.
Nice.
And it's pretty much all they sell. And why is that important? I'm now part of their tribe. I've only been there once, and I'm wearing their flag, right? People like being part of something. They like having a story behind it. I like that I just told you and you lit up and you're going there, right?
Yeah.
I've now just given you value in something, and I vouch for it.
Right.
Right. That's how this works.
There's a reason why the last question I ask all my guests is, who do you respect and admire and believe would make a great guest mentor on the show like you made for us today?
Oh, so many people. And I might pick a person or two who really could offer value to some of the things that we've talked about today when it comes to true hospitality. And you may or may not have had them on. I don't know. Two guys that come to mind right away that are, I would pay my staff. I was opening a bar to go and sit in their bar for 3 days and just watch them work. Are the two Julios, Julio Cabrera at La Trova. Have you interviewed him?
I haven't, but I want to. I'm headed to. I think I might have mentioned it off air. I want to buy an RV.
Yeah.
Obviously, with winter fast approaching, I'll be heading south. Florida is going to be top on my list.
Yeah.
So I would love to get him on the show because.
So I can introduce you if you'd like. He's
Please.
a very good friend. Studied with me as well for a number of years, and so Julio and what he's done at La Trova, it's the only place in this country that I know of. I'm sure there could be more. That is the full package for hospitality. I mean, you walk in the door, from the cantoneros behind the bar, Latin Grammy winning artists playing music for you, incredible Cuban coffee, the 80s bar in the back, the patio with cigars. He just opened up his own line of cigars, the rum collection. It's unbelievable.
Beautiful. I can't wait to go.
If you do go, and if you're lucky and they're all there, his wife Betty works there, who's awesome. You should talk to her.
When's the best time to go? Make that happen.
He travels a lot, so
Yeah.
I could find out. And then his son Andy heads up the bar, and he is incredible.
Next generation, love it.
Yeah.
You said two people. Who's the second person?
Well, the other Julio is Julio Barmetrix at Tommy's. Do you know?
No.
Oh my God! So
and where's Tommy's located?
in well, they told me it was in San Francisco. It's not downtown, and San Francisco is like DC. The traffic's awful, so
Right.
it took me a while to get out there. It's only 10 miles outside of town. I don't know the area that well, so one of the suburbs.
Yeah.
It's
West
Tommy's Mexican restaurant. So Tommy's Margarita.
No.
Oh, it's one of my favorite drinks. Instead of triple sec, using the agave nectar, fresh lime, tequila, Julio came up with that. So it's
cool.
a modern classic. It's all over the world now.
So the two Julios.
Yeah, and they're two totally different operators. They're really good friends. Two totally different operators. So one's a Cuban place, one's a Mexican place. And Julio Barmetrix, anybody who's ever sat at the bar with him behind it can tell you everything that happened during that time.
I love it.
I've never met anybody that can say that.
Man, I get some work cut out for me. I would love to get these guys on the show. Thank you very much. And before we say goodbye, obviously, if we listen to today's episode and we're resonating and jiving with what you had to share, and knowing that there's a service out there where we can connect with you and work with you, what is the best way to connect?
I think the email. So it's, what's that? Oh, the website. Oh, okay. Yeah. We just redid the website.
Alley off camera.
Alley's off camera. Reminding me what my website is. So it's Sean Finter. So SeanFinter.me. So SeanFinter.me. Yeah. So, not a pitch. If anyone is obviously interested in the coaching, I'd be more than happy to talk about that. But if there's anything you heard today, like we have a pretty significant vault of tools, templates, and everything else. And I always just love to help people that are stuck. And so
and you're not promoting it, but I am. I'm here organically. My whole thing, my whole shtick with Restaurant Unstoppables, I let the industry steer where I go and who I talk to. And you're here for a reason, because people who have worked with you are successful and they have amazing things to say about you and the work you do. And I want more people to know about the work you're doing. So
that's cool. Thank you.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. So you shared your email. You did mention there's a book. What's the name of that title? And when can we expect it?
So
I don't want to jinx you by saying it out loud.
Yeah, well, the book, the short story on this is that I wrote a book years ago after a near-death experience in an airplane.
Oh, man.
And I thought to myself, oh, my God, my kids are so young, like I haven't written anything down. So I wrote it all down into a book, and it was like a monster. It's just too big. And a mentor of mine who passed away recently, Ivan, was the At the time, he was the president of Diageo U.S. and then became global. And so it went to his people. And long story short, we turned it into 8 video courses that went into around 50 countries around the world called Business of Ours.
They own that now, right?
They had the rights for a period of time, and now I've got it back.
Oh, good. And
so I am taking one piece of that and turning it into a book, which is the working. Well, I won't tell you the working title, but the other working title is Napkinomics, which goes to the story about how to put the entire organization onto one page, and then how to teach them hospitality, how to make sure you get the right people. It has worked for thousands of businesses, like over 5,000 businesses around the world. And I'd be happy to send it out to anybody here to kind of show you what it looks like and the tool and the whole deal. I'd love to share it.
I think it's a Diageo Bar Academy is the new platform that they got going on.
They've got it. They've got it up there too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a. I think it's free, isn't it?
Yeah. There's the tools there in the template, but if you go to the website I told you earlier at seanfinter.me, I'll give you a video on implementation, how to launch it at your business. There's about a 30-minute video that goes with it.
Awesome. Again, this is, I don't think I actually said it yet, but episode 1027. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/1027. We'll have a summary of today's discussion, as well as any tools or books mentioned and how to connect with Sean over there. Sean, this is where I say thank you so much for taking the time. I just ask questions. You make what I do possible. I can't do what I do without people like you. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
All right. Thank you very much. And I hope we got time for a cigar.
Oh, man, I hope so. I'll make time for it.
And a Tommy's, yeah.
All right. Let's make it happen.